Hello, everyone, and welcome to our comedy movie Mount Rushmore. It's on the Movie Change Up podcast. This is the second Mount Rushmore we've ever done. I'm Joe Fricke. If you didn't see our first Mount Rushmore episode, basically what we do is we take various categories within a major category. This time, like I said, is comedy movies, and we break them down and we kind of give what our Mount Rushmore is. It's kind of a thing they do on sports talk podcasts and sports talk radio or like ESPN or something like that. And kind of the difference between a Mount Rushmore and a top four is like if you were to do, your top four quarterbacks, these are just like the best four people to ever play quarterback. And with a Mount Rushmore, you kind of have different things you want to represent. Maybe you want to represent different eras or different types of quarterbacks. But with movies, it's like, hey, we want to represent different things. These are not necessarily like our personal top fours. So if you have a problem with what we picked, then just realize that we're trying to represent various things and not necessarily picking the top four. And I'll say, for me, it was kind of hard because, like they say, comedy is subjective. But Johnny, kind of, what were your thoughts? What was your process going through this?
Yeah, I tried to stick with some like, okay, I know this one is super iconic, but maybe I'm not as familiar or it's not my style. If I thought that something from that era should be on, I tended to lean more towards like a movie I like or a performance that I'm a fan of rather than like, okay, in the history of movies, maybe this one's more impactful, but you know, this one is maybe more impactful for me. And I kind of want to do that because knowing that you three are also going, I think that makes for good arguments and someone kind of defending of different styles of comedy. But there are some in here that I think are locks. There's some in here for every category that I'm like, I could easily see that one coming out. So I'm excited for the conversations.
Yeah, all right. And Bobby, was there any particular categories you struggled with?
I just comedy is so subjective that I struggled with picking, I think, more iconic for the genre in this one. I feel like I stuck a little bit closer to in a couple categories, like what was maybe more influential for me, maybe like in quotes, um, and the comedies alone. But like, directors, I feel like you have a pool that you're picking from that's more like iconic to history and a few other ones like that. So I think it's a good mix of personal taste and kind of the history of comedies.
All right. And Tristan, kind of the same question. What was your biggest struggle compiling your Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, it was hard for me because I watch a lot of movies, but comedy is one of my kind of uh, weaker points, I guess, in terms of how much I've seen in the genres. So I particularly struggled with some of these, but my hardest was performance. I sat there and I thought, oh, this guy has to be on, this guy has to be on there, this she has to be on there, and I had a list and a list and a list, and all of a sudden I looked and I had like 25 people, and I was like, well, there's only four heads in Mount Rushmore, so I gotta narrow this down by
Hmm.
quite a lot. So that was the one I struggled with the most, but a lot of these are hard to pick. Like you said, it's subjective, and you gotta balance between what I like and what is iconic. And for me, I leaned more towards picking the stuff that was iconic. If I was in the middle of, if I had like five people to pick, and there was four spots, and I said, okay, which of these four are the ones that people talk about the most, and which one is less talked about? I did stuff like I went on lists and watched best comedy quotes, and it was like, okay, if my quote isn't in this top 50 list, maybe it's not worthy of the four Mount Rushmore pick, something like that. But I'm excited to see how you guys narrowed down your list because it was a lot to choose from.
All right. And before we get started, I just want to say we're definitely growing as a channel, as a network, because we have our very first ever spam Twitch comment, which is from YHBubby20125 that says, "Want to become famous? Buy followers and viewers at some random link," and then it just says bigfollows.com. So hey, you know,
If you
Wow.
click that link, you vote
It
for Trump
sounds it
after.
sounds legit to me. I mean,
yeah, I'm
we need it,
definitely
right?
gonna click on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, basically we're just gonna go through our categories. I'll kick us off, but if for our podcast audio people that can't see our list on the screen, we're gonna do comedy duos, comedic performances, comedy quotes, dramatic performances from comedic actors, which I think is going to be the one that is going to be the most similar across the board. And
Hmm.
then we have comedy directors, and then finally, our final category is comedies, which I think is more likely that we'll have 24, or not 24, 16 different movies for that one. And that's going to be our biggest argument, and that's kind of be the order we're going to go down. Let's start this off. I'm going to do comedy duos. And this is the one that I was most open with that. It was very hard for me to find four I liked. I tried to get a more diverse angle, but it was very hard, and I kind of didn't get as diverse as I would like because I want to represent different things, but I kind of wasn't able to, and I think that's more of a Hollywood thing than a me thing. But to start off, my first comedy duo is Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. They had a number of comedies together, all classics. They were supposed to be in Blazing Saddles together, but Richard Pryor wasn't able to. But he still wrote part of the movie. My next comedy duo is James Franco and Seth Rogen. Basically, their comedy duo dominated the late 2000s, early 2010 between Pineapple Express and various other movies. Another one I have is Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly. I kind of like them because together they're great, but they're also independently, they've also done great work where they don't necessarily have to be together all the time for their comedies to work. And then my last one is to represent the old school era. I have Abbott and Costello. I feel like you can't have a true comedy duo Mount Rushmore without Abbott and Costello. Yeah, Costello. And so those were my four. Johnny, what were your four Mount Rushmore picks?
You know, we had a couple similarities on there, Joe. So I'll start with those. Yeah, my first one is Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. Can't argue with them. I think they're fantastic. Even like movies that maybe people don't know as much nowadays, like Hear No Evil, See No Evil, is so funny. That's a hysterical movie, and they're very funny together. They have great chemistry. I also went with Abbott and Costello. That's another one. It would be between them and Laurel and Hardy and Abbott and Costello with Who's on First and them meeting Frankenstein and Boris Karloff and all those has always been more impactful. Like those are things I actually watched and I'm not familiar with Laurel and Hardy. So I stuck with the one I know. My like 2000s pick is Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson.
Okay.
Mainly for Zoolander alone. I think that movie is so funny. And you know they did Night at the Museum. They were both in the Royal Tenenbaums. They like even movies that they don't necessarily like interact with each other. They're in, but you know they did Starsky and Hutch. They are iconic, and I think they edge out like a Seth Rogen, James Franco type to me, just because they worked more together. And then my last one is another one I don't think you can really argue with, Cheech and Chong.
Oh,
Come on, man!
Dude,
Up in Smoke is one of the funniest movies ever.
Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah, Cheech and Chong is like, you know, Tommy Chong, Cheech Marin, they're iconic, and I think I tended to lean more towards like Abbott and Costello and Cheech and Chong. Like you don't need to know the rest of their names; they're known as that. I think that solidifies them on top of the Mount Rushmore. So
I'm officially subbing out James Franco and Seth Rogen on my list for Cheech
Yeah.
and Chong. So
There we
Seth
go.
Rogen and James Franco were never on my list. Those were my four. James
I was
Franco.
secretly hoping I was the first one to bring that up and get that reaction
Yeah,
too.
no.
I was waiting for
way.
it myself as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was another one I figured was an easy choice. Like they were the original stoners. Seth Rogen I do love, and I have a lot of time for him, but Cheech and Chong were the originals, and they're so funny. So those are my four. Pryor and Wilder, Stiller and Wilson, Abbott and Costello, and Cheech and Chong. So Bobby, you're next.
Well, three of mine have been said, so I'll kind of quickly go through those. I have obviously Abbott and Costello, the first one I put down. The second one was Cheech and Chong, and then Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. I think those are pretty much locks, or at least to be in contention. But my fourth, I kind of wanted to represent like the nerd culture a little bit, a little more indie film. So I went with Jay and Silent Bob, Jason Mewes and Kevin Smith.
All right, yeah.
Just for just the iconic, even just the look of them, like they're action figures and they're in, they're more popular now in the YouTube space and podcasts. But I think their dynamic has kind of stayed in culture, at least with film lovers and nerd lovers. So I had them in there. I was considering like the Ben Stiller, Owen Wilson, and Will Ferrell, and that, but that's what I went with as my fourth, and I think they're pretty iconic.
Bobby, because I forgot to write any of these down, and I didn't know if anyone else was. Can you recap your four for me?
Yep, I had Abbott and Costello, Cheech and Chong, Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, and Jay and Silent Bob. So Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes.
Cool. And Joe, I have Pryor, Wilder, Cheech and Chong, Abbott and Costello. Who's your fourth?
Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly.
There it was. Okay, that was the one I forgot. All right, perfect. And now we're on board. So I like those four so far. So Tristan, what do you got for us?
So a couple of mine have been mentioned, so I'll start out with those. I want to reiterate Abbott and Costello. I think that embodies the classic kind of era of comedy, and I think all four of us have that on there. Might be the only thing all night we have all four of us with one thing on the list. And Cheech and Chong got brought up before, but I think they sum up that stoner comedy vibe really well. I think they're the James Franco, Seth Rogen kind of predecessors, I guess. Like you wouldn't Rogen James Franco if you didn't have Cheech and Chong to set that up. And I think even stuff like Harold and Kumar, even that all those stoner comedy kind of things of the early 2000s, all kind of owe a debt to Cheech and Chong. So I gave a pick to them. My two that haven't gotten picked, I went with Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. I think they work really well together, whether it is in movies. I know this is a movie podcast, but I think I give them a little bit of points for also working outside of that, working in other forms of media. And I think they transcend. I think they're sort of like the auteur duos in my mind. They direct, they write, they produce, they star. They kind of like cover all the bases of filmmaking, not just like actor duos or director duos or something like that. I think they have that modern auteur kind of sense, and I also think it's good to represent some diversity on the field, and I think they don't necessarily get the credit they deserve as being the auteurs that they are. And my last pick is someone I wanted to use to represent kind of comedic relief in more serious movies, and also to represent kids' movies. So I went with Timon and Pumbaa, inseparable duo. And I think Lion King isn't necessarily a comedy, but I think I wanted to give it's comedy duo, so I think it made sense to these comic relief characters inside of a not necessarily comedic movie. So I wanted to give them some points.
That validates a choice I have later on, so I like that choice at least.
Yeah, validates a little
like
bit of choice
that.
for me too. So.
Mhm.
I like it. My only one that wasn't just like an acting duo that was in my honorable mentions was Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks. But I ended up going with Pryor.
Yeah, me too.
And Wilder instead. I like those. Tina Fey and Amy Poehler also honorable mentions on mine.
Mine
I guess
too.
we'll go back to. All right, so to kind of solidify things, I have everything written down. All four of us have Cheech and Chong and Abbott and Costello, so those are locks. Three of us, I think, have Wilder and Pryor.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be tough to take off there. So
I have my pick for what should be the fourth, and it's not one that was on my list. I think we should have characters, and I think we should do Jay and Silent Bob. That's
Jay and Silent Bob are my number 5.
If you're gonna include
make a good pick.
If you're gonna include a character duo, I don't know how you're gonna argue against Jay and Silent. I love Timon and Pumbaa, but there's like Lion King 1.5 and Lion King 2, but Jay and Silent Bob have the longevity that Timon and Pumbaa don't really have. They're just like in 3 movies, and so that would be my pick. And I just wanted to comment on Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. I think if we were doing like a TV comedy duo, Mount Rushmore, I think
if we were doing body of work, yes.
Yeah,
but
I think
movies,
if we were doing TV duo Mount Rushmore, I think Tina Fey and Amy Poehler would be my number 1 pick. Like that's the first duo I'm writing down. But I think as far as movies, the only ones I can really think of are like Sisters and Baby Mama, and I don't know if that's really enough to.
They were both in Mean Girls, which
but they weren't
only
even
one.
I don't even know if they.
But they're not even together in it. Yeah. They did not.
No, that was more the writing and that too with that one. So. Yeah, I mean, I was gonna fight hard for Jay and Silent Bob.
They work outside of just being actors on screen together. You know, they produce stuff that other people are in.
Yeah. No, that was definitely in contention.
Yeah.
I was just gonna fight Jay and Silent Bob, and Joe kind of did it for me. But that would be my kind of thing too.
My argument against Jay and Silent Bob is, as much as I love Jay and Silent Bob, they are always the same character, and they're the best when they have their few little scenes, and every time it's like their own movie. The new Jay and Silent Bob movie, like, I appreciate it because I like the characters, but that movie's unwatchably bad. Like, so when they center around them, that makes the movie a lot worse. I love them popping up in Clerks and Clerks 2 and stuff, but they're always the same. I think as far as like a comedy duos, as far as like a widespread in movies, Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson have the track record together and have a much more diverse range of like characters. You look at them in Zoolander compared to Night at the Museum compared to Royal Tenenbaums. They're completely different characters in all those, and they always work together. And even like Starsky and Hutch, like I think they that would be my pick over them. I did have Jason Mewes and Kevin Smith as Jay and Silent Bob as like an honorable mention, but they weren't even in like my top 6 or 7. I think David Spade and Chris Farley is better. Laurel and Hardy, if we went with a classic pairing, is more iconic. And even like doing Gene Wilder, Mel Brooks, and Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, I had them under all of those because they're always just the same characters that appear in a specific set of movies.
But I think
Which
if
is
you
what
want
I
to
was going
represent that,
for, though.
but I
It's
think if you-
representing characters. Yeah,
I
exactly.
What
think
argument-
so, but I think like even in terms of that, like if we're going characters in more iconic movie that's more widespread, that more people like, there's a lot of people in the world that are just like, no, Kevin Smith movies, I'm out. Timon and Pumbaa, I think, are more iconic characters in terms of, you know, majority of what people, you know, think of. More people know who Timon and Pumbaa are than Jay and Silent
the
Bob.
first gay couple on screen, you know, Timon and Pumbaa.
Yeah, you got representation on the list, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
Bad
look,
news to the Odd Couple.
yeah, no, look, that's one I would fight for, but I like there are so many, like I can't, you know, like Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson are great. I love that. Amy Poehler, Tina Fey. I think the only thing that I would leave them off is that because this is more of a movie list. So
Yeah.
to me, that's kind of pushes them down. For personally, I think it's between Jay and Silent Bob and Ben Stiller, Owen Wilson.
Yeah.
To go on that fourth, because I think, are we saying, so we have Abbott Costello, Cheech and Chong, and then Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor. Are those
Yeah.
locked?
I would say so.
I think
Yeah,
Cheech and
100%.
Chong to me cover that kind of like characters on screen together. So if I was gonna pick that last spot, I think Jay and Silent Bob would be a good fit. But I do think that we already covered kind of like the duo characters of Cheech and Chong, and they're or almost sort of in like
Yeah.
a similar.
I think there's no. My thing is, I don't think there is a Jay and Silent Bob without Cheech and Chong, and I don't think you can put two of those, like one set of characters that's so inspired by something else, like on the same Mount Rushmore. And Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson are so different than anything we have on this list. And honestly, off my board, I would fight for David Spade and Chris Farley, even though they basically did 2 full movies together. Tommy Boy is one of the funniest movies ever made, and Black Sheep is a Black Sheep. Like, that's a very underrated movie. It's amazing. So I think those two are super iconic and different.
I would be okay doing that because those were like my 5 spot, and I know Jay and Silent Bob is more niche. It was just that's the niche and the kind of the type of thing that I wanted to represent on my personal, you know, Rushmore.
Yeah, I get it. I love them. Yeah. The fucking scene when Jason Mewes reenacts the Silence of the Lambs in Clerks 2.
It's amazing.
It's one of the funniest things
good.
I've ever seen. And I love them to death. But yeah, I just think because they're always the same characters, and yes, that's iconic in a way, they aren't on the same level of Cheech and Chong, but it's a similar like genre, you know. Yeah. So I don't know. Would you guys want to go Ben Stiller, Owen Wilson, or did you want to go with the character aisle and go Timon and Pumbaa, because that's way different than anything we have on this?
The problem with that to me is movie-wise, there's really only 2 legit theatrical movies, which one is the animated and the one is the remake.
Yeah, but they're in just one movie. They are big enough to be as iconic as any of these characters that have come back over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Can I? I mean, I don't think it's gonna change any opinions here. I think but we do have 2 live comments that I wanted to read.
Let's hear.
So Paul just said yes! Exclamation point! Cheech and Chong, and then Spinner 58, who's old as dirt, just said Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. So as an option.
I mean,
he met them, right?
But
she met them.
Yeah, I mean,
but
iconic.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm not gonna lie and say she met them, but probably. Who knows?
Yeah, let's throw like Lucille Ball up there with like Clark Gable or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
You know, I don't.
Desi Arnaz.
We already have Abbott and Costello encompasses old people thing.
You get one.
Yeah, you get
See,
one
my
of
vote,
old people.
I mean, I know it wasn't on any of their lists, but if I had to vote between Timon and Pumbaa, Owen Wilson and Ben Stiller, and Farley and David Spade, my vote would honestly be for Farley and David Spade over. Because my thing with Owen Wilson, outside of Starsky and Hutch, I feel like Owen Wilson and Ben Stiller are more just 2 people that happen to be in a lot of ensemble movies together, where I don't necessarily.
But Zoolander, man.
I don't necessarily fully see them as.
They're iconic in that.
Okay, so that's one.
Hansel and Zoolander, I would say, is more than Starsky and Hutch.
Is it as iconic as The Lion King?
Like, my thing though, like if I'm.
For me, yes.
If we want to go around the room and vote, at least on those.
I guess they did Zoolander too, though. So actually, yeah,
that
you're right.
cancels
Maybe
it out.
Take them off. Yeah, that might.
Because my vote would honestly be for Spade and well, because originally I had like Lloyd Christmas and whatever, you know, from Dumb and Dumber, but I'm like
Jeff
Dumb and Dumber
Daniels
2.
Dumb and Dumber 2 is so bad
Dumb and
that
Dumber
it
2 takes
it
them off the
away.
list, and I feel like Zoolander 2 is the same way. So my
You know what, Joe? I think you convinced me. So Joe and I think both vote David Spade and Chris Farley. Where are you guys going? If you had to vote.
So if we're going between David Spade and Chris Farley and Timon and Pumbaa, I'm going Timon and Pumbaa.
Or Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson.
no
Ben
one's voting
Stiller-
for that at that
Ben-
point.
Yeah, I know. I mean, if you're getting rid of your own, like out of all these, personally, I'm still fighting for Jay and Silent Bob. But if we're eliminating that, and it's basically,
I would say it's too similar. I agree with Johnny's point. I
Too
feel
similar
like it's
to
too
Cheech and
similar
Chong,
to Cheech and
which
Chong.
is fine. So then
The
at
reason
that
I
point,
like
I
Timon
would
and
say
Pumbaa is
Timon
that
and
they're
Pumbaa.
nothing like anything we all have on the list. They're animated. It's a kind of a kids movie, and none of these really fit that vibe of kids movies, of animated, of totally out of the wheelhouse of these movies.
Yeah, I'd be good with that.
See it, but I do think like they're in one movie together. I don't count any of the Lion King sequels or the remake. Like they're in one movie, and yes, they're iconic. But if we did comedy duos and just did two people that were funny in one movie, our list would be 100 people long. I leaned more towards people that work together more times, or people that showed up. I'd go Jay and Silent Bob over Timon and Pumbaa actually, because
Me
they
too,
appeared in
but-
more movies together.
Yeah.
But I think David Spade and Chris Farley are much different than everything we have on this list based on comedic style. It's not like stoner comedy. It's basically the straight man and the pratfall guy, and that's not exactly what we have. I think you basically combine Cheech and Chong and David Spade and Chris Farley, and you get James Franco and Seth Rogen, which was on Joe's list. Like they're more influential to today's comedy than Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes or Timon and Pumbaa. You know, I think if you ask most comedic actors now, they're like, yeah, Chris Farley is my. You do not have Melissa McCarthy without Chris Farley. You know, you don't have a lot of people
Is that a
nowadays.
blessing or a curse?
It's.
I think
you know,
my thing
I
is if
agree. I don't love her, but
if I'm looking
You don't
at
get a lot of
someone
that.
else's list and they have like the three we have locked in and David Spade and Chris Farley, I'm like, yeah, I agree with that list. If they have the three we have locked in and then Timon and Pumbaa, I'm like, okay, they just wanted to represent like animation. Like I don't know if I necessarily
It's
are
called
like,
the Mount Rushmore. That's what
I
you're
get
supposed to
that,
be
but I also don't know if like I feel
but
like,
like
I don't know.
yeah, I don't know.
So do we flip a coin at this point
This
if
is a
it's
hard one.
deadlocked at
Let's-
2-2?
I have like three.
I mean,
yeah, like
Bobby,
I'm
but
between-
Joe and I agree, and those two are one.
I'm willing to concede on this one because I have quite a few later on in the episode that I'm gonna have to be arguing.
This is
harder
our
and harder.
first category.
I'm okay. I'm okay conceding. I didn't know where
Okay.
we were falling. We've gone through so many different
Yeah.
ones, but
I'd go with Chris Farley
yeah,
and David Spade if I was gonna concede.
All right.
yeah.
All right, and we do
All
have
right,
another live
so-
comment from Spinner5858 that says Lucille Ball actually made movies before the TV show. Don't give a fuck. She's not worthy of our. Women are not worthy of being on Mount Rushmore, as you can tell by
Wow.
Mount
I
Rushmore
tried.
being 4 guys.
Wow, Joe, with the take that none of us agree with, so
Yep.
don't take him seriously at his word on that.
Well, that opinion
Um,
will change
This
eventually.
opinion does not represent the thoughts of movie
Yeah,
changes.
this opinion does not represent the thoughts of
Yeah.
movie change up. But I do think with the fact that we were outside of Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, you don't really have another argument, and that's more saying something about Hollywood than I think
Yeah.
it is for
Yeah.
our taste. It's just, you just look back and you could look at top 20 lists, and I doubt there's many other than Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. I don't know who else is popping up in terms of that. So maybe that'll change one day, but not now. So our top 4 ended up being Cheech and Chong, Abbott and Costello, Gene Wilder, and Richard Pryor. And what did we end up doing? I don't even remember. We ended up going
David
with
Spade and Chris
Chris
Farley.
Farley and,
Chris Farley.
and David Spade. Perfect. Well, nothing like a 20-minute argument on our first category
Yeah.
that we thought was like the least important one. So, Joe, I'm starting next, but what category?
Comedic performances are next.
Okay.
I went down the list as it was written, so
Yep.
it should be comedic performances, then comedy quotes, then dramatic performances from comedic actors, then comedy directors, then finally ending on comedies.
Yeah, but I just don't have any of it in order on my document, so
Oh,
that's
okay.
where I
Yeah, that'll do
so I
it.
don't have the list in front of me. So comedic performances. Okay, I think we'll have one in common. We should have one in common for all 4 of us,
Yeah.
and the other 3 I think might all be a fight.
Yeah.
But I will start with this one. Charlie Chaplin as the Tramp. That is easily a lock. That is on the Mount Rushmore.
Not on
Yes,
my
it's
list.
a problem. It's a problem that kids nowadays will look at it and think Hitler is on a Mount Rushmore because they don't know who Charlie Chaplin is. But Charlie Chaplin is the Tramp. Whatever movie you want to stick with, whether it's
Not
The
on my
Kid or
list.
City Lights or any
Not
of
on mine
those.
Let's get a
Next,
fight now.
I have the greatest villain in comedic movie history, and that is Christopher McDonald as Shooter McGavin, baby, in Happy Gilmore.
Yeah, baby.
I think that is such an underrated performance, and people don't really know who Christopher McDonald is, but when they see him, they think Shooter McGavin. Like, that is how iconic that character is.
Shooter.
That's how iconic that performance is. He should have won a goddamn Oscar for that movie.
I ate pieces of shit like you for breakfast.
You pieces of shit for breakfast?
No. Even Kanye stole that for Jesus Walks.
Yeah.
Kanye stole that line. So my next one is another one that I don't know if anyone else has, but I think it is. I will fight to the death for it. Captain Lionel Mandrake / President Merkin Muffley / Dr. Strangelove. Peter Sellers in Dr. Strangelove gives the 3 iconic performances in one movie, and the actual Dr. Strangelove character, I would argue, is the greatest comedic performance of all time. So I would go Peter Sellers in Dr. Strangelove, or How I Stopped. What is it?
How I Stopped Worrying and Love a Bomb.
Yeah, I forgot the word worrying, and that threw me off. And then my 4th spot is another one of my favorite comedic performances, but also something that I credit an entire genre for and an entire actor's career for. We do not have the icon Keanu Reeves without Sean Penn as Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That is one of the most amazing performances of all time, and it's the surfer stoner, and it's the best to ever do it, and we do not have the legend of Keanu Reeves without Sean Penn playing Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. One of my favorite comedies of all time. So those are my 4.
Spoiler alert, Spicoli was in my 5 spot. Did you see that Shia LaBeouf performance in that read-through of Fast Times?
That was really funny.
The greatest thing to ever come out of quarantine is Shia LaBeouf as Spicoli in that read-through.
Spicoli's so good. Spicoli's the reason that my friend David and I ordered a pizza to our auto shop class and got detention for it, and our teacher ate the pizza just like in the movie, and I was pissed. But that movie I'm obsessed with, and the fact that it's Sean Penn I think makes it even better, because now he's the most unlikable person on the planet, and he was such a dramatic actor, but he started off as Spicoli, and that is an iconic role. So those are my 4.
All right,
Bobby, what do you got?
We had 2 in common. I'll start with those. So first I had, because we just talked about him, I had Spicoli, Sean Penn. I think that's iconic, and what made me think of it is the Shia LaBeouf thing. I recently rewatched Fast Times because of that, and he's just so good. It's so funny. You talked about it enough there, and also my favorite villain performance in any comedy, like you said, Christopher McDonald as in Happy Gilmore as Shooter McGavin. It's iconic. He's just known as Shooter McGavin. You can quote almost every single line he says. Spoiler alert. And
Shantytown.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as a villain character in a comedy, especially a sports comedy like that, I think that represents it, and that's one of my favorite performances. The other one I have is one I'm kind of surprised Johnny didn't have is I have Bill Murray in Ghostbusters to represent more just iconography as far as pop culture, and kind of sci-fi, and kind of he's the dry kind of humor in that movie, and I think it's hilarious. He has some of the best quotes, Bill Murray's great. I tried to pick one performance of his, and I went with Ghostbusters, but you could go with almost any of his movies, really, comedies. And then the other one I had is what I was talking about with Timon and Pumbaa. I have Robin Williams as Aladdin as the genie. Robin Williams is iconic in general as an actor in so many different levels, and I think this is one of the funniest performances in any Disney or family type of movie. So much. Joe apparently doesn't like it.
Bad pick.
But yeah, well, apparently Joe has it on his list. But no, it's so much of it is improv. There's a lot of like just the backstory of how that character came to be is amazing. It's the first Disney movie to cast a big name actor in a voice role, and he wanted to play that. There's the whole backstory of him getting mad at Disney because they marketed him, and then from then on they went on and to cast celebrities in like all their voice roles. So it's iconic on a lot of levels. But if you think of the genie, it has to be Robin Williams, and yeah, I don't think you can beat that as far as family movies go.
I respect it. I don't respect not having Charlie Chaplin on your list, so I'm interested to see what Tristan has over there.
All right. Unfortunately, you won't. Mine's different. I do have Charlie Chaplin on my list. I went with The Great Dictator specifically because I think that is really a shining performance.
respect
but
it.
really, you can give it to him from any performance. But none of my other ones have been brought up so far. So you want to talk about iconic performances? You want to talk about like a performance that makes an impact on a character? Let's go with Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown in Back to the Future. That's such an incredibly energized performance, and I think his performance is what makes that movie into something great. I think he brings such an energy to it that I think all of his scenes are so magnetic, and I think he elevates that movie in such a way that his performance, exclusively his performance, elevates that movie in such a great way that I think he really deserves that spot. Plus, like even now, how many decades later, he keeps coming back on talk shows and doing cameos as Doc Brown and that kind of stuff. And I think, and you've seen it too, they can't do another Back to the Future simply because they can't recast these characters. Like these characters are too iconic to be recast, and I think that speaks to the performance. My second is another very iconic character, a character so iconic that there's an annual festival dedicated to him, and it's Jeff Bridges as the dude from Big Lebowski. I think that's really, really great performance, especially like he's not necessarily a comedic actor all the time, and I think that was such a really dedicated performance for him to give, and I think it was very iconic. And like I said, it inspired festivals. It has a huge cult following. Every time I've seen it in theaters, it's been sold out and filled with people, and everybody's been super into it. And I think that's just that one role in particular kind of defines Jeff Bridges' whole career. I think when people see him now, he says all the time everywhere I go, people are like, "Oh, it's a dude."
He was just hired as the Lions head coach.
Yeah.
And I have Charlie Chaplin, Great Dictator. I mentioned that, and my fourth pick is one that I think represents improv comedy. It represents the kind of like off the wall zany comedy of the early 2000s. The kind of like offend anybody you can offend comedy of that era, and it's Sacha Baron Cohen as Borat.
It was my fifth.
I think that character alone was such a huge impact. People quoted him all the time. Like I try to get him into the quotes from comedies, but there were so many that I just realized like I couldn't just pick one Borat quote people said. Like everyone, yeah, for like years.
That would
and
be
years
it.
And that came out to be like my wife, and other and like
Still
very
to this
nice
day.
and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and like just saying Borat lines. I think his performance, and he got these
Coach
people
is black
to such. It's similar to sort of like Nomadland in a way. Like he got these people to do things that they necessarily wouldn't want to do on camera. Like he got these people to say things they shouldn't have said and do things they shouldn't have done. And I think that takes a really strong performance to get people to feel that intimate with you, you know. So those are my four. I have Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown, Jeff Bridges as the dude from Big Lebowski, Charlie Chaplin as the Great Dictator, and Sacha Baron Cohen as Borat.
All right. All right. I have some picks other people don't have. So I'll start with ones that we have. So my first one is Charlie Chaplin from The Great Dictator. He's basically, they don't call him the tramp, but he's basically the tramp for half the movie. And then he's kind of like this evil comedic villain that's a take on Hitler for the other half of the movie. And I felt like it was good, because in a lot of comedies, like Johnny mentioned with Doctor Strangelove, an actor playing multiple roles in the same movie. You have like Jack Nicholson in Mars Attacks, which wasn't anywhere near like my Mount Rushmore of that, but it's a thing that I wanted to represent, and I feel like that was kind of my favorite of an actor kind of playing multiple roles, and then he's playing the main hero and the main villain. So I went with that. The other one obviously had to go with Robin Williams and Aladdin. I wanted to represent the animated comedy, and I felt like, to me, that might be my favorite Robin Williams performance. It's probably the best performance in an animated movie, and they said there's so much tape on this movie that there could be a G-rated, a PG-rated, a PG-13, and an R-rated cut of Aladdin, just because of how much improv that Robin Williams did, and basically the role was perfect for him. He could, was the perfect Robin Williams like vehicle essentially as the genie. My next one that no one else had was Bill Murray as Groundhog Day. I felt it was perfect just because
As Groundhog Day.
As Groundhog
You
Day.
played
Yeah,
Groundhog
I
Day.
was going
Groundhog
back
Day.
and forth. I just picked the movie I liked better.
Basically, the reason I picked that is because there is zero reason to like him in this movie. He is such an asshole for like 90% of the movie that you should just hate and despise him. But Bill Murray has so
But
much
he's
charisma.
also named Phil, just like the groundhog.
Phil.
Yeah, but
Phil.
but his charisma.
Bill
and
Connor?
Yeah, his charisma and everything is like why you love him. Like it's to me that's why I had this performance. And then the one that completely changed an actor's career, I went with Leslie Nielsen in Airplane, who as like kind of the straight man in a movie. I wanted to represent that. And then basically that movie completely changed his career. He was, only a dramatic actor up until that point, and then once that movie came out, he was only really ever in comedies. So those were my four. Leslie Nielsen in Airplane, Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator, and then Robin Williams in Aladdin.
Yeah, so many of those were like I swapped them out. Like I had them on my list this past like couple days and like swapped them out. But Charlie Chaplin's one that I should have had on and just forgot about as I was going through it. Yeah. So that's definitely a lock.
And then Paul 220 said Peter Sellers would be my number one pick. So
that's the best performance in any comedic movie.
This was such a hard one because there's just so many to pick from.
Yeah.
Like there weren't a lot that you guys brought up that I was like, oh, they sucked. A few that I didn't mention that I thought like I wish could have gotten in. There's Adam West's Batman. I think he has that kind of like really dry leading guy, kind of like Leslie Nielsen does, and I think his performance is kind of underrated, but he gives a great one. Macaulay Culkin, Home Alone would have been good. I would have liked to get like a kid performance in there.
Yeah, I thought about him.
That's very iconic.
Me too, but I thought the genie kind of.
But come on,
the family film.
Look at the rest of these.
My last cut was Amanda Seyfried from Mean Girls. I think that I gave her credit because it was her first performance in a movie.
It's like ESPN or something.
First performance, she was able to give a lot of good lines and really iconic lines. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's so much better than them. You want to represent people, but it's also like when there's so much better.
Trying to make fetch happen. Yeah, I'll give a shout out to a few. I had a lot written down, but the ones that we kind of hadn't mentioned. Alicia Silverstone as Sharon Clueless is incredible. Yeah. She's great. That was close. Paul Newman as Reg Dunlop in Slapshot. That movie fails if he is not incredible. And when he just looks up at the end and goes, "Scouts?" is one of the funniest lines in any movie, I think. Will Ferrell as Ron Burgundy. Jim Carrey as Ace Ventura. Bill Murray I did have down for Venkman, and Carl Spackler from Caddyshack is my honorables. But again, he's a tough one because he expands so many eras and he has so many iconic performances. He just didn't make my list. Robin Williams, I actually had down Mrs. Doubtfire, not the genie. I think that's his most iconic performance. And then Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka is incredible, but I do think that leans a little more towards he's dry humor, but it's kind of dramatic in it. Leslie Nielsen in Airplane, and then one that no one else would mention, but Peter McNichol as Dr. Janos Poha in Ghostbusters 2 is incredible.
Wow,
I think that is one of the funniest, most underrated roles of all time. It was never going to really make mine, but I think that is, if I were to do personal favorite, like top 10 comedic performances, that might make my list. I think he is so funny in that movie, and he's the entire reason to watch that. But those are kind of my honorables. Did you guys have any honorables before we get into our debates?
I had Sacha Baron Cohen as mine. I was going back and forth on which Bill Murray, and I think Groundhog Day is probably the more that's probably. It's just I went with, but personally I like Ghostbusters a little more, so I went with that. But Charlie Chaplin definitely should have been on there. I just didn't think about it as I was going through. But I had a lot of the ones that were mentioned were on and off. I had Leslie Nielsen on there for a while, so. All of these are legitimate choices.
All right. So
what's
my
our
question
lock?
is, Charlie Chaplin is our lock. But
since you didn't have a movie, do you want to just go Great Dictator? Since that's what me and Tristan both had.
We can, but I think
played
his most
Tramp.
famous character is the Tramp. So I think if it was a Mount Rushmore, he would be on there as the Tramp. But he, like you say, he's basically that character as Hinkle or whatever his name is in The Great Dictator.
Well, the character that's not Hinkle doesn't have it. He's called the Barber in the movie.
Oh, you're right.
But Adenoid Hinkle is Hitler.
Yeah. So either way, so we're basically going Chaplin, but I think just saying the Tramp is his most iconic character.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I don't hate that.
That's fine with me.
And then do we want to have a Bill Murray role, and then it comes down to hashing it out what it is?
I mean, maybe,
So,
but I
but
think
the thing is, I actually
I
think
think Bill Murray is my favorite of all time for his career, but I don't know if he has one performance that I'd put over like Sellers or Sean Penn is Spicoli. Bobby and I both had. I think that was the only other one that any
it
of
was
us had.
Aladdin.
Spicoli was
Genie.
my 5.
Genie and Spicoli.
Spicoli was
I
my
would-
5, and Shooter McGavin was my 6. I'll say that.
And Johnny and I both had Shooter. I mean,
And-
personally, the one I would
and
fight for the
Spicoli.
most as a Mount Rushmore, because it represents the family genre, is Robin Williams as the genie.
Yeah,
I want to fight for Sacha Baron Cohen. I think that's a genre that I want to represent. Like, that's such a different thing from what we have, and I think the zany like off the wall kind of catch you off guard documentary style comedy.
My argument only against that is, I think if you cut down to its core, that is an improv performance and a political satire, and I think Peter Sellers did that years and years ago at a time that those movies weren't being made, and I think that character you can credit to a lot of that stuff even existing. So I think if you're going, like, he was the only person who was ever allowed to improvise anything in a Kubrick movie.
That's
because
not
he was
entirely
so good.
accurate. There are 2 other
Not
instances.
completely, but there
Yeah.
are a couple other. But he was like the one that was like the main
Throughout the movie,
person who
yes.
was allowed
Yeah.
to do that.
'Cause
Like throughout the movie, and he literally made they had to reshoot scenes because he was making people laugh so hard on screen that they had to reshoot it. And like, you show the scene of him trying to keep his arm down from doing the Sig Heil when he's in the chair, like that scene makes anybody like laugh hysterically. That's one of the best performances.
The thing
and
is,
he plays 2 other great characters.
so
in
what
the
do we
same
have
movie.
locked in right now? What do we have?
I think locked in, we only have the Tramp so far. I think we could go
My
Genie or
Genie is
Spicoli because
my
2
other
of us had
lock.
those.
And 2 of us
I'd
had
ra-
Shooter, but I out of all the
I feel like
ones
we
that
need
we
a
had
villain.
2 of,
Like, we don't have a villain, and I feel like a villain does need to be represented, and there's no better comedic villain in film than Shooter McGavin.
and I would
Like,
personally lock in the Genie as well, and then fight for that 4th.
It's between Spicoli. So if we lock in the Genie, then to me it would be between Spicoli, Aladdin, and wait, what?
Aladdin is the Genie. So yeah, hold on.
I'm confused. What are we doing?
Yeah, it's tough because if we go for, I think the Tramp and Shooter McGavin, because when you think of Charlie Chaplin, you think instantly of the Tramp. When you think of Christopher McDonald, if you see him on screen, you think, oh, that's Shooter McGavin. More people know Shooter McGavin than his actual name. I think the other ones on this, like, yes, Robin Williams as the Genie is great, but you don't immediately think Robin Williams and immediately go, yeah, he's the Genie. Like, there are plenty of roles. And I actually think his dramatic roles are
But that's
more
because
iconic
he has
than any of those, but
he has
so many, and
performances.
that was my
Right.
problem with Bill Murray too. Of, you don't look at Bill Murray and think this role. Like,
I think I
Yeah,
want to
that
argue
Genie
for-
is so perfect for.
but I would say that over. I would say that over like Borat, even though I love Borat.
Yeah.
I think that one is.
How do you feel about Doc Brown, Christopher Lloyd? I think you talk
To
about
me-
looking at an actor and you think of the character, like that's what it is for him.
Yeah, but
I love the
I mean,
character.
I
To me, the
personally
character's
think
great.
of a couple other roles for
But
him.
I also don't
I recommend
think of-
Nobody to everyone. Christopher Lloyd's great in it.
Yeah, he keeps hyping it up on Twitter. To me, the thing with Back to the Future is it has its comedic moments and stuff, but I don't necessarily go like comedy with that movie. Like, it's not a laugh out loud like
But
type
he's
of movie.
really funny in it.
He is
He
really
is funny in it.
But I would go Leslie Nielsen in Airplane over him for that. If I'm going just like purely like comedic role, like, surely you can't be serious. Everything that Leslie
Which
Nielsen does in
might
that
get
movie is
talked about
incredible.
later.
Possibly,
But that's not even
we'll see if
similar.
that
Like, he's
starts
playing like a
next list.
deadpan flat lead, and Christopher Lloyd's playing like a really ridiculously big, zany kind of high energy character. Like, what is the comparison there?
My comparison is just like in terms of like what I think is maybe more of an iconic comedic role in terms of like what was mentioned on a couple lists. Like that one I go over Doc Brown. I think Christopher Lloyd is great in that, but at the end of the day, he kind of is just being Chris Lloyd. If you've ever seen him in anything else, he is always that same character.
Yeah,
and
and
I
I would
go
put,
away. That's why like Sean Penn as Spicoli is so against type. and you do not have Keanu Reeves without him. Like I think that.
But like
we
Keanu
don't
Reeves
have-
is not like Keanu Reeves is iconic, but
No.
not. It's not like Keanu Reeves is like, oh, without Keanu Reeves, like that's not a big selling point to me. For
But like,
Spicoli's
Bill and Ted's
iconic
Excellent
on its
Adventure
own.
and Bogus Jr. are
Bogus
great.
Jr.
Like, but I think that Bogus Journey. I think that role spawned more. Like that was more of like it opened the door to that type of humor than Chris Lloyd as Doc Brown. Like
Yeah,
what role
that's
do you
true.
point to
That's
after
accurate.
Doc Brown and say this role doesn't exist?
All right, so
without
what do
him?
we?
Yeah.
So what
Other
are we
than
voting
like Rick
on?
and Morty?
What do we have and what are we voting on?
I'd say we have the Tramp and Shooter McGavin.
Yeah.
I would say I think the Genie. I would put the Genie on there.
Okay, I'm good.
You
with
guys
that.
agree with that?
Those,
Yeah, I
I,
put
I
the
agree
Genie
with
on.
Tristan
all
and Bobby had the Genie.
No,
So.
Tristan and Joe had the genie.
me
Oh,
and
Tristan.
Joe.
No,
Yeah, there we
Bobby.
go. We
were
got
all
it.
wrong.
Yeah.
Corner team.
Diagonals
team.
here, that
Corner
way, I
team.
guess.
The
yeah.
one that we haven't really talked about that I thought was a good choice from Tristan was Jeff Bridges as the dude.
Yeah,
That's
a really
I'm,
good
I
one.
don't hate it. I'm okay.
Thank you.
I'd be okay with that making the list.
That would be, yeah, I would go with
Part
that.
of me does think though that character is
That rug-
kind of the spawn of
It
like
really holds room. in
Spicoli
it.
type of character. Like he's just his own guy and he lives in other people's world and he's always going to be himself type of thing. But it isn't like the surfer stoner dude. It's a little different. But I think Spicoli. I mean, Bobby and I both had him. Only one of us had the dude. I thought about it. He's hysterical in that movie.
Yeah.
The Big Lebowski is amazing. And I didn't have it on there mainly because the movie, yes, is more of a comedy, but it's
My
also
thing is Jeff Bridges as the dude is iconic, but to me, if I'm thinking of iconic, there's nothing more iconic than ordering a fucking pizza to your classroom, and that's
Yes.
I love Jeff Bridges as a dude. If I were to vote between all the ones that we're kind of considering right now, I love Leslie Nielsen in Airplane, but like no one's really talking about that right now. My vote would be for Spicoli from Fast Times.
Yeah, I
we
think
got-
the
Yeah, and he's just so funny in that.
Than that, and I think when you think of iconic performance, people think of the dude before they think of Spicoli. I think
That's
people-
my only
maybe,
argument
maybe
for
now
that.
because people are younger, but like if you look at the span of like actual like people who know film, like I think of Spicoli before I thought of the dude for this list, like way before.
Yeah.
Spicoli's,
And Spicoli,
an
like I said,
incredible-
was my 5.
And I think with Spicoli too, you get not only Keanu Reeves and Pauly Shore and all of the knockoffs of this character, like how many characters exist today because of the dude? Like I don't know exactly how many characters he necessarily inspired, as amazing as he was. I think if the only tiebreaker between those is characters he inspired, and I think Spicoli inspired more characters than
I don't
the
know what
dude.
your
That'd be
point
my
is.
only.
So I'm
argument.
pointing.
Joe, I
I've
don't
been
know what the
I've
fuck
been
you
drinking
said.
some whiskey right now. So Paul 220 brought up what happened to Peter Sellers.
Yeah.
Also, Peter Sellers, that's the greatest comedic performance of all time. Of all time. And he's
Okay,
three
we're
characters.
50 minutes in and we're at our
We have
second
two
category.
of them. We have
I
three
say
of them locked.
we go around the horn. We vote right now. Whatever wins wins.
Okay.
All right, go around. So
As
Joe
the
starts.
host, I don't care about this movie. I've seen it twice. Paul 220 brings up my votes for Peter Sellers.
I go Sellers.
Did you go Sellers? I mean, yeah, I guess I'd
Let's
go
go
Spicoli.
Sellers.
Yeah,
Alright,
that's
Peter
fine.
Sellers
Let's do
is our
Sellers.
vote. Paul 220 basically fucking got Peter Sellers on the list.
I think Spicoli and the dude kind of cancel each other out as like the famous stoner character, and Peter Sellers in that movie kind of encapsulates the Eddie Murphy genre of playing multiple characters in one movie, but is probably the best example of it. So I think that is different than everything else we have on the list. So
All right, moving on.
All right,
Bobby,
so now we're
you're
on.
doing... Or
yeah.
wait, no, Johnny, read us our
Quotes.
4. Johnny, read
Yeah,
us our
read the
4.
4.
Okay, so our 4 we ended up with our Charlie Chaplin as the Tramp, or the Great Dictator, honestly. We have Christopher McDonald as Shooter McGavin. We have Robin Williams as the Genie. And we have Peter Sellers as Captain Lionel Mandrake, President Merkin Muffley, and most importantly, Dr. Strangelove.
All
So
right.
that is our 4.
All right, Bobby, hit us up with comedy
All right.
quotes.
So let's go with quotes. And this one, this is
Wow,
one of
this
the
is gonna
toughest.
be all
This
over
is
the
going to be
fucking
all
board.
over the board. I had about
I'm going to do a better job at running this.
Yeah, I had about 15 of them going back and forth, but I think I landed on ones that one I used all the time that I think, and just all all time comedic moments as far as quotes in movies, and I think I came up with a good mix. The first one I have was just mentioned by Joe when we were talking about Airplane. It's Shirley, you can't be serious. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. I think that is just lived on from that movie. That's like the one quote that people go to in a very iconic parody movie of the time, and I don't really think you can beat it. As far as like, I think most of us should probably have that one on the list. Um, and then the next one I had is from another iconic movie that has lived up to kind of the test of time, and that is from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's just a flesh wound, or just that whole scene. It's just a flesh wound. Your arm's gone.
Your arm's gone.
Your arm's gone. Like I've used that I've used that a million times. Whenever you get hurt, that's what you say. It's just you can use that on a daily basis.
Tis but a scratch.
Yep, exactly. The next one I have is from Shooter McGavin, and that is the "I eat pieces of shit like you for breakfast, and then you eat pieces of shit for breakfast" line back from Happy Gilmore. Again, it's just Happy Gilmore is my most quoted movie of all time. I had about 5 different quotes from this one particular movie. Like, "Are you too good for your home?" Like, so many lines from that. That's the one I landed on, and because it's from kind of the most iconic character in the movie. But I had to include it. It's Johnny. Growing up, we would quote that movie all the time, so I had to do that. And then the next one is is it more of like the unexpected comedic moment where you think it's about to get a little bit more serious, and then the comedic line that's a callback comes in, and that's from Ghostbusters. It's true, this man has no dick, because I think it's delivered perfectly by Bill Murray, and you don't see it coming the first time you see the movie. You think it's like, oh, he's confessing to something or whatever, and he's just calling back to an earlier joke that he made earlier about dickless, and that like it's
Or
just
2 lines earlier.
Yeah, but right, but you don't.
He called
It
dickless.
is. Yeah, exactly. But you don't.
But
You don't know
it's
that that's where it's
incredible.
going.
I'm just saying it
Yeah,
wasn't like some.
it's the
callback to
delivery.
earlier.
I think it's
Yeah,
it's
the
more
delivery's
it's the
amazing.
delivery of it. You just don't think that that's where he's going with that line.
Yeah.
So that's where I went with that
definitely.
one. So yeah,
All right.
there's my 4.
Cool. So Bobby has his 4. Tristan's next. I have kind of an argument against almost all of Bobby's, so I'm interested to see what Tristan has.
I have one that crosses over with Bobby, so I'll get that one out of the way first. And it's "Don't call me Shirley." It's a very iconic quote, so I had to get that on the board. We mentioned Airplane earlier, and that's easily the most iconic part of the whole movie is that one line. My second one is from Mean Girls. It's "On Wednesdays, we wear pink." I think that's a very iconic quote, and I think
Yes.
Mean Girls has a lot of quotes. But the fact that you can walk into like a Target anywhere in the country and buy like yoga pants that say "On Wednesday we wear pink" on them, or like you can find that quote embroidered on all kinds of stuff still, like even beyond Mean Girls at this point. I think that's a very iconic quote that impacted like the social consciousness in a really strong way. Another one that impacts social consciousness in a really strong way is "Holy blank, Batman." He says it a couple times in the movie. I think the first one is like "Holy heartbreak,
Holy
Batman."
bikini bottom, Batman.
Holy bikini bottom, Batman.
Yeah.
I think talk about quotable. Like how many times have people in their lives quoted the "Holy something Batman"? I think all of us have quoted that. How many multiple times across our lives? I think that was huge, and it was in the movie a handful of times, so it counts for me. And my last one is a Samuel L. Jackson classic. "I have had it with these motherfucking snakes on this
This
motherfucking plane."
Really?
Wow.
That was a
What's
reshoot
it
too.
Yeah.
I read an article about that basically people online made that quote up after seeing the trailer, like, oh, that should be a quote in the movie, and they reshot the scene to put that quote in the movie.
And even better is I've had it with these monkey
Fighting
fighting
snakes
Yeah.
on this Monday to Friday
plane.
The edited version on FX. Iconic.
All right.
That
So
is
is
a
it my
great
turn,
line.
or you got more?
Yes.
Yep, those are my 4.
All right. So to go along with everyone else, I have "I Am Serious" and "Don't Call Me Shirley" from Airplane. So I feel like that's basically a lock at this point. I also have a movie I don't care about Monty Python. As if you've watched our Movie Change Up podcast before, I don't care about Monty Python. I've never actually seen this movie, but every time I injure myself, I do say,
Yep.
'Tis but a
It's
scratch.
okay.
So there was no way I
Yeah.
couldn't include that line in my list of Mount Rushmore of comedy quotes. I also have one no one's talked about before, which from When Harry Met Sally, I'll have what she's having, which is pretty
Oh,
Yeah,
good one.
that's a really good
That is
one.
a good
pretty
one.
iconic. And then one, I don't know if it'll make the overall list, but one I even if you've never seen this movie and someone starts saying it, you know exactly what they're talking about, and that's Ferris Bueller's Day Off of Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. And those
That's
are
a
my
really
four.
good call
Good
too.
old Ben Stein.
Yeah.
So here's my thing with mine before I intro my four. I stuck with, because we said quotes and not comedic exchanges, I stuck with single lines of dialogue
That's what I did
from
as well.
one person.
That's what
So
I
I
did.
think that kind of takes off my board a couple of the ones you guys had on your list, like the whole exchange of it's just a flesh wound and it's just but a scratch. I took all those off. I took off Surely You Can't Be Serious because it's two characters exchanging dialogue. I stuck with one person saying something iconic. So, number one, I have, was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor from
Yes.
Animal House?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That is such a good line for so many reasons, and even everyone's reaction to it. They're like, well, he's wrong, but, we respect what he's going for. Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room from Doctor Strange Love.
Yeah.
Probably finish that sentence. I think one that, to me, like Joe mentioned, every time he injures himself, I work in a restaurant, and like this week happened, the reason we're doing this episode today, having to work days that you were supposed to be off, the most iconic line to me that I always say,
Oh, yes,
I
that's
wasn't
gotta be
even
on it.
supposed to be here today, from Clerks, is iconic in so many ways, and something that I lived through, like, since I started working. I wasn't even supposed to be here today. And it's said throughout the whole movie, and it's not an exchange of dialogue. That's an iconic quote. And one, again, that has lived in pop culture forever, that will never go away, that's referenced in Straight Outta Compton by Felicia from Friday. That line is incredible, and it's great in the movie. It has such an impact on a lot of humor that came afterwards. And again, it's not, I tended to go with just one line of dialogue rather than something that kind of relied on an exchange. Even like the I eat pieces of shit like you for breakfast, you eat pieces of shit like you like for breakfast. That's an exchange of dialogue to me, and I didn't count it as a quote. So I think to me it had to be one person saying something to really like count. So I didn't go with the Surely You Can't Be Serious line and more of the iconic ones that people might have thought of, because I stuck with individual quotes rather than you have to know of the entire scene to kind of get the reference, or you have to know the lines before to get the reference. So I stuck with something you could put on a wall. If it's a Mount Rushmore and you put it on the wall, people know exactly what you're talking about, and it makes sense without knowing what came before it.
Yeah, I mean that stipulation definitely brought more options to the table for us.
Yeah.
But I think because most of us did not do that, that we shouldn't hold it against the other quotes. But that definitely brought some really good ones for sure.
Yeah, that's basically what I stuck with. But I did have, as far as my honorable mentions, I did have, yes, it's true, this man has no dick. Because that's a great line, even if you don't know the dickless thing.
Oh,
and wasn't that improv as well? I feel like I read
I'm sure.
Bill Murray said in an interview recently that it was improv.
I had, what is this? A Center for Ants from Zoolander, which is great. This rug really ties the room together. That rug really tied the room together. So you're saying there's a chance from Dumb and Dumber? Yeah. That's another line that like is said nonstop. And another one that is just you don't really think of it, but Strange Things Are Afoot at the Circle K from Bill and Ted. That's a great line.
I can't see a Circle K without saying that line.
Yeah, I don't know what a Circle K is. I've never seen one, but
it's like a 7-Eleven.
If I did, I would say it.
I had to fight myself to not include a dodgeball quote because I knew that they didn't work. For
I would have included Nobody Makes Me Bleed My Own Blood.
That I had Nobody Makes Me Bleed My Own Blood, and I had no. If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. Like those are the two from that movie that I was like they were going back and forth whether I'd have them on there.
So that gets into how the fuck are we gonna?
Okay, I will say
decisions?
to me and Bobby.
Shirley's on there.
I think I think that's on
gotta
there.
be on there.
Surely you can't be serious and don't, or whatever it is.
Yeah. I am serious and don't call me Shirley is the quote.
I am
If you want to
serious
go
and
for that.
don't call me.
And then I think, what was the so
I
we
like
had
Tis But a Scratch.
yeah the scratch flesh wound.
I don't because both of you said that, but both of you said different lines.
Right.
There's
like, I would
not
always go
one
with
that
flesh
sticks
wound.
out. This is just a flesh wound. There's also, I'll bite your legs off. And then there's, tis but a scratch. And then it's your arm's gone. I think there's too many. If we were doing scenes, 100%. But if we're doing quotes, there's not one quote that sticks out above the rest in that scene. It's just an incredible scene.
Yeah, it's just one
so
great
that's
scene
what-
rather than one good quote.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
but-
think that.
Personally, I've always heard the quote I've never heard anyone quote "tis but a scratch." I've
Oh, that's
always
what I
heard
always
say,
go to.
No, I've heard that, and I'll bite your
"but
legs
a
off.
flesh wound." Right. I
And
mean,
your
as far as
arm's gone.
we do the whole scene when we do that, but it's
So I
everyone
think that's
starts
more
with
scene
a flesh
than
Okay,
wound.
I can agree
quote.
with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
I
just-
But
think if you
based
go
on
quote,
reaction,
I wasn't even supposed to be here today. And
That's-
Joe's.
based on the reaction
I can't argue with Joe's. Yeah, say what you're gonna say, Joe.
of I'll have what she's having. That's
Yeah.
to me. That was the first one I wrote down. To me, that should have been everyone's number one pick, because
I
that's
didn't even think of it. That's the only reason it's not on the list.
Same.
I'm gonna make a point for on Wednesdays we wear pink. I think Mean Girls.
I
Has
think if you
want
to go recent,
I don't think that's even
That's
the most
not the best
iconic
quote.
line in the movie. I don't
Right.
think that's even in the top 5.
Yeah,
I think
more-
you got to make. You can't stop trying to make fetch happen. Is probably the most iconic.
If
line.
I were to
That's-
pick a
that's
quote from
quoted
Mean
way
Girls,
more.
it would be "Stop trying to make fetch happen."
Same here.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that actually you reference to people. And
Right.
if anyone's trying to do something that you want them to stop, you're stop trying to make fetch happen. But you never actually say to anyone, we wear pink
Yeah,
on
that
Wednesdays.
quote,
What?
I didn't think that as a quote. That's more of a
That's just
it's
a
a
thing
joke
that
in a
they do.
movie that happens, but and it's something you can put on a T-shirt because you're gonna make a pink
And
shirt.
because there's a store
That's
called
it.
Pink, so
Right,
it's on those.
exactly, but
the
that's
only
not
reason.
that's not to me that's not the best quote in that movie personally.
No, 100%. I think that's a weaker quote from what that movie is, but I think it's funny. But that's not even really much of a joke. It's just this is what we do. I think there's plenty more lines in that you could have gone with. I think I would fight for if Tristan had, stop trying to make fetch happen, which is what I thought he was going when he said Mean Girls. I thought that one,
Same.
has a chance to make it for sure. But okay, so what do you guys think of maybe arguably the most famous quotes from any comedic movies of all time, other than
By
I'll
far.
have what she's having, was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?
My vote.
And gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room. That line, if you look on any, even just not even comedic movies, but if you look at top AFI's top 100 quotes, that's in the top 10.
Yeah.
I think that line is
See, my
funny.
vote-
And you don't need to know any context. It's just, you can't fight in here. This is the war room is a funny line. It's a well-written line.
My vote of all of the lines that weren't on my list would be "I wasn't even supposed to be here today."
Same.
Yeah,
I
that
think
one I
that's
use
one for
too
me.
much.
The War Room one is a great quote, but it's not very people don't, I think, just repeat it all the time. It's just a very
Not
well
today,
written.
probably.
Right.
But
Well,
of
no,
its
it's
era,
more.
yes.
It's a very well written line, but I wasn't even supposed to be here. You can actually apply it, so people use that all.
Yeah, that's true. And we didn't represent Jay and Silent Bob, and so I wanted something from Clerks, so that was my representation of Clerks.
And
I think the
I
Holy
actually really
Blank
like.
Batman quote is a pretty
Yes,
good one.
I-
I'd be okay with those two.
I like-
With the
That's
two
tough
we
to
have,
beat.
I would love that one.
Holy Blank Batman and I wasn't even supposed to be here today, plus the two we've locked in, I'd be perfectly fine with.
I'd be good with that list.
Plus, we've taken forever on a lot of these arguments. It'd be nice to be like, fuck it, we got our 4 locked in.
Same
We're good to
here.
go.
I think the
Yeah.
next one will be easier.
Yeah, I think the next one
We'll
will have
see.
more commonalities. I have 2 that
I,
yeah,
I think if you look
probably.
at
I think there's 3 of them probably that we have. Right.
I went with a
kind of-
different choice on one of them that I don't think anyone else will have. Just because
I
I wanted
have
more
one.
diversity on my
Yeah.
list.
Same here.
So moving on, our top 4 are I Am Serious and Don't Call Me Shirley from Airplane. We have I'll Have What She's Having from the Billy Crystal movie.
When Harry Met Sally.
When Harry Met Sally. We have I Wasn't Even Supposed to Be Here Today which just every time he says it gets funnier and funnier in Clerks. And we have holy bikini bottom / blank Batman. That line is incredible, and
Especially
I
now.
agree. I was gonna put on it's a tough day to get rid of a bomb, but Tristan chose the much more iconic line. Like I kind of went with the Mean Girls thing, like he did, of choosing like the not as famous thing, but stuck out to me maybe. But I think the definitely holy blank Batman is a great choice. So those are good. Those are good ones. And Tristan is going to lead us off.
Before Tristan starts, we do have another comment from Paul. Paul basically said, "My favorite line from Naked Gun, which is another great classic comedy movie, is Priscilla Presley on the ladder." Because I remember that scene. You have Priscilla Presley on the ladder, Leslie Nielsen standing under her, looking up at her, saying, "Nice beaver," and then she brings down a stuffed beaver, which is
that movie. Like that's the problem with like Airplane and Naked Gun, though, is it's just line after line. Yeah. My favorite line, like yes, the Surely You Can't Be Serious is probably the most famous, but I had a drinking problem is my favorite line because it follows him with just missing his mouth out of his face. He just that is. But incredible.
Like that line doesn't make sense without the visual context, and neither does Nice Beaver. Like if we put Nice Beaver as on our Mount Rushmore, people would be like, "What?" Yeah.
People would be very confused. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick, but Tristan, lead us off for whatever the fuck category.
We're on dramatic performances.
Yep, dramatic performances from a comedic actor. I have 4 for this, obviously. My 4, one that I think is the actor maybe on the list, but I went for a little bit of a different pick for him, is Adam Sandler. I went with Punch Drunk Love for that. I think he gave a really good performance in that, and I think his comedic kind of experience shines through a little bit in the energy of the character, but I really love that performance in that movie a lot. I think that humanizes him in a really interesting way. My second is one that I think is pretty much a staple. It's Bill Murray, Lost in Translation. I think he's definitely known as a comedic actor, and I think some of this was like, oh, are they really known as comedic, or are they more of like mixed at this point? But Bill Murray is definitely a comedic actor, and this was his big dramatic role that people really took seriously and really watched. And I think like that last scene, people remember it so well, and people remember a lot of these moments so well. Like when he was filming that commercial, and the director's kind of like yelling in his face in Japanese, and he doesn't understand the language. He's just sitting there, and it's like these very comedic exchanges between Bill Murray, but it's also ultimately a dramatic movie. And my third is Jim Carrey in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. One of my favorite movies of all time, and I think Jim Carrey's an actor that I don't like. I don't like his style, his Ace Ventura kind of comedy. So whenever I see him in a movie, I usually just say, okay, I'm not going to watch that one because it's not going to be for me. But he did a really great job in this, so I picked that from my list. And I did a little bit of a cheat at this point. My fourth is look, cheating is part of the game, you know. My fourth is a dramatic performance from a comedic actor, but it's in a comedic movie, and it's Charlie Chaplin's final speech in The Great Dictator. I think that's a really, really powerful moment to watch, and I love watching it, and I think I've watched it over and over and over again. Even though the movie's a comedy, I think that's a dramatic performance, and I think it's done so well that it kind of wakes you up and shakes you from the comedy around the rest of the movie.
Tells me
so
Joe
that's
has
my
that.
cheat pick.
It's not on
Also,
my list.
we have-
I'm going to tell you right now, it's not on my list because it's a comedic movie.
That's true.
And his performance outside of that Adenoid Hinkle before that speech and the barber outside of that speech is still a comedic performance. Just because he has a dramatic speech doesn't make it.
And he's already on the list as a comedic performance for that movie.
Yeah, so not on my list.
All
right, so I'll get to my fourth. So my first one, which I thought everyone was going to have, I thought this would have been everyone's number one lock, is... Wait, you were done, right, before I start?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, is Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting. Like, I thought that was going to be on everyone's list. My next up, I do have Adam Sandler. I didn't choose Punch Drunk Love because I thought there were, like, a few comedic moments in that, but I do have it from Uncut Gems, which to me is his best dramatic performance. The next one is one I don't know if people will have, because from that, currently he's kind of seen more as a dramatic actor, but I picked Tom Hanks in Philadelphia, who up until that point had really only done comedy. Like, that was kind of his first dramatic performance, and he won an Oscar for it, so I obviously had to go from dramatic performance. And like I said kind of at the beginning of the show, I wanted more diversity in my picks, and this is a female pick, and I picked Mary Tyler Moore for Ordinary People, who up until this is only really known for her comedy work on television shows. and this is kind of her first big dramatic role, and then she won an Oscar for it. So I thought, kind of to represent, I wanted to represent women on my list, and so I went with her. And so that was kind of my options. But if Johnny's back, perfect.
Oh, I'm back.
Yeah. Did you hear
I'm
those?
back. Got some things to say. Yeah, I got them all written down.
Same.
I like Joe picking a dramatic
actor. Yeah.
and Tristan picking a comedic performance, but we'll go with the locks here. Bill Murray in Lost in Translation. I think that's a lock. I think Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting is a lock. I went with Adam Sandler as Howard in Uncut Gems as well. That's his best dramatic performance. He has 3 really good ones. Punch Drunk Love, underrated Reign Over Me is great.
Yep.
But Uncut Gems, that was the best performance of the last 5 years as far as I'm concerned. And I'm pissed that it was not nominated for an Oscar. That's probably my favorite performance of any movie since Heath Ledger's Joker. I think he's incredible in that movie. And then I also went Jim Carrey, but I went a different route. I was between Eternal Sunshine, The Truman Show, but I went with his best performance in Man on the Moon. He is great in Man on the Moon. That's his best performance. That was like the most dramatic he ever went because he stayed in character the whole time. He's incredible in that movie. That, I think, while maybe not being as strong of a movie as Eternal Sunshine or The Truman Show, that's his best performance ever. So I think those 4 for me were really tough. Jerry Lewis almost made it for the King of Comedy, and Jamie Foxx
Not for When the Clown
Ray,
Cried.
but I don't know what you just said. What?
When the Clown Cried, which is the unreleased movie where he, as a clown, led children to their death in an internment camp.
What about the number 23?
No, I didn't know about that. No, we're not doing that. Yeah, and then same thing. Like I went with Jamie Foxx as Ray, but I felt like he turned more into a dramatic actor after that.
Yep.
So I didn't go with it. Like that's the reason. Yeah, Tom Hanks was a comedic actor up until Philadelphia, maybe, but afterwards you can't really argue that Tom Hanks, if you look at his body of work, is a comedic actor. So I get what Joe was going for with that, but I went with actual, more known as comedic. Even though I would argue, I put Robin Williams on here because we texted in our group chat that it doesn't really matter how many dramatic performances they had, but like I think personally Robin Williams had more better dramatic performances than ever comedic performances as far as movies go. Obviously, he did his stand up and some TV shows and stuff, but that's kind of my feelings on that. So those are my 4: Bill Murray, Lost in Translation; Robin Williams, Good Will Hunting; Adam Sandler as Howard in Uncut Gems; and Jim Carrey in Man on the Moon are my 4. So Bobby, what do you got?
Okay. So most of mine have been said. There's only one that is not. I have Jim Carrey from Eternal Sunshine. I think, to me, that combination of best movie and best performance, to me, like Man on the Moon, like you could argue it, but because Eternal Sunshine is such a stronger movie, it stands out way more to me.
And he is, I guess he's playing a comedian, but like I think it's more of obviously a dramatic role.
But to me, that's the role that stands out for me for Jim Carrey. I also have Robin Williams from Good Will Hunting. I think that's pretty much a lock. He's amazing in that movie. He is known more for his comedic roles, even though he was such a good dramatic actor as well. But
he was better, as a dramatic actor.
Yeah, but same thing for that. Adam Sandler, and I literally wrote Punch Drunk Love because I haven't seen Uncut Gems. So it's one of those two. It's one of those two.
You haven't seen Uncut Gems?
Yep.
I've seen that movie 12 times. What's wrong with you?
Right. But that is my note. He's so good at dramatic acting. I wish he would do it more. I know it's one of those 2 movies, even though I love Reign Over Me as well. But basically, Adam Sandler in one of those 2 roles has got to be up there for sure. In my last one, I have Whoopi Goldberg in The Color Purple.
So did Spinner 58.
Yeah, but to get some diversity for multiple reasons up there, but also, even though that was her first, she won an Oscar for it, and like she came in as like this dramatic actress. She was comedy after that completely, and that was
except
really
for Ghost, where she won.
Well,
Wait,
but
she was only nominated for.
She was the comedic relief. In
she was the
Ghost,
comedic
though.
relief in
Yeah, true,
Ghost, so
true.
she was still never dramatic, not to this level.
Yeah.
So that would be mine as a black woman who's typically comedic, winning or like
She was
as
nominated.
an Oscar level nominated for her performance.
Yeah, that movie famously nominated for 11 Oscars, which is a record. And
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
win a
not
single
winning.
Oscar.
Yeah, I kept saying winning, but nominated for it. I think that is a great performance that I think should get at least consideration. But
it was my like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
My problem was I haven't seen it, so it was.
I've never seen it. That's the only.
I have, and she's
problem.
really good. She's really, really good in it. It's surprising knowing what she does now, what she does in that movie. Like to
I've
see
also
the rest of
seen
her
it, and I think
career.
she's pretty good. So I would think it would be a good spot to pick the 5th.
Only actress ever to be nominated without eyebrows.
Wow. But yeah, so that's my 4. 3 repeats, essentially, and then 1 new one to add on.
Those are solid.
Okay, so we locked in Robin Williams and
Jim Carrey.
I was gonna say Adam Sandler, but
Sandler for sure. But I think
Sandler.
Personally we go with Tristan's seen both. Bobby and Tristan both had Punch Drunk Love, but Tristan, would you go Punch Drunk Love, which I would argue does have some
He had
element
Punch
of
Drunk
comedy?
Love.
He had Punch Drunk
in
Love,
there.
but would you think Uncut Gems? Or if we're going,
So the
Mount
reason that I went
Rushmore-
with Punch Drunk Love over Uncut Gems is that I think it kind of set the precedent a little bit. I don't think you get him in Uncut Gems if you didn't have him kind of put on like the indie art scene kind of map with Punch Drunk Love, where it was like, oh, he's gonna
maybe,
look
but I would
like
say that it's such a better performance. I like Punch Drunk Love fine, but Uncut Gems, I think he's incredible in that movie.
yeah.
And I do agree with you. I think there's a little bit too much comedy in there. But if we're also giving Bill Murray Lost in Translation a pick, then I think there's comedy in that movie too, probably an equal amount of it.
But But a lot of it is like him standing in an elevator with a straight face, looking and being a foot and a half taller than everyone else in the elevator, or like you said, like him standing there straight face while the director's yelling at him. There's not like him cracking jokes. Like in Punch Drunk Love, Adam Sandler has some like quirky, like not quirky, but more like lines that are kind of funny. Bill Murray is just like, because of the expressions on his face and the scenes that he's put in, that kind of sells the comedy. And without his just like his performance, those scenes don't work. I think if you replace Adam Sandler and Punch Drunk Love, I think you have just as good of a movie.
I think as you were talking about it, I was thinking too, and I think Uncut Gems, I might go with that because I think that has the appeal of like people really wanted to win the Oscar, and he had a bunch of people like, oh, Adam Sandler was so good in that. Adam Sandler was so good in that. It had like a word of mouth effect. People all wanted to see it because of that. And I don't think Punch Drunk Love necessarily had
he
that.
gave a speech in his Adam Sandler voice when he won Best Actor for one of the award ceremonies that he won for, which was incredible. Yeah, I think if you put Ben Stiller in the Punch Drunk Love role, you have just as good of a movie, but I don't think anyone else could have been Howard in Uncut Gems.
Wasn't Jonah Hill offered it first and he turned it down?
For which one?
Howard in Uncut Gems.
Probably, but he wouldn't have been as good.
No.
Adam Sandler's amazing in that, and he has the look for it.
Yeah.
You know,
Howard, he would have been.
Punch
Jonah
Drunk
Hill
Love, he
would
could have
been
looked like anything. So, are we saying? My question is, which Jim Carrey movie are we putting on?
My vote,
I mean,
personally, I
Eternal
just don't
Sunshine,
like the movie,
personally.
but a lot of people do. My vote, unless we want to go a more different pick and do like Whoopi Goldberg in The Color Purple, my vote would be Jim Carrey in Eternal Sunshine.
Eternal Sunshine's, if we're gonna pick between those, like that's such a good performance to me. I love that movie and that.
And I think it's one people talk about too. People always say, "Oh, you gotta see him in Eternal Sunshine," though. Like that's when he's really good. And
Yep.
I think so. Yeah, I think maybe just the performance he put more into was Man on the Moon.
He
But
put
I
more
think
into it, but I
overall,
don't know
maybe
if it
you
paid
could
off as
say
well.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
it's a great documentary, though. The one on
Yes.
Netflix about him
Yeah.
getting an
Exactly.
executive.
Yeah, watch
Right.
that, and it really
Well,
sells you.
He put
on
so much
that,
work.
you know?
I think he overdid it though a little bit compared to Eternal Sunshine, where he's just so believable and good in that. Like, I love that movie.
It's a great one. So what? I'm trying to think here. So we have, as far as what I have written down, Adam Sandler in Uncut Gems, Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, Jim Carrey is in Eternal Sunshine. What am I missing something?
I don't know. Internet's acting all weird and shit. Yay for bad internet. I'm just doing this for the recorded version because no one else can hear me. Internet.
It would be that. It would be the only other one that I think is in consideration is Whoopi Goldberg in The Color Purple or Mary Tyler Moore in Ordinary People.
So
I've never seen
so
that
here's
either.
personally, with the list we have right now, I think we should do either Whoopi Goldberg or Mary Tyler Moore, because Bill Murray is in the same camp to me as like a Robin Williams and kind of an Adam Sandler. He's like between the two, where he does both, and he does both really well. And that was like his first big.
Can I throw one out there and just see what you guys think, because I don't think any of you have seen this movie. Aubrey Plaza, would you agree that she is a comedic actress?
In Ingrid Goes West?
No.
Okay.
In Black Bear, she's incredible in Black Bear. If we're going female performance, that's one of my favorite female performances of all time, and she is.
But if we were going to do,
but that's not iconic, and it wasn't like
as far as a Rushmore.
It's not a Rushmore level
movie. Yeah. If you guys had all seen it, I think we might.
I mean, you go with Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, I say Whoopi Goldberg.
That to me fits the best, but I didn't want to push mine as much. So.
Yeah, because I mean that was a hard. I can't argue with it because I've never seen it, but I know that was on.
Yeah.
I did do research on this one, and she was on every list, so I agree.
Bobby got a whole list to himself.
Yeah. Other than I said Adam Sandler, Punch Drunk Love, because I haven't seen
Bobby's never
Uncut
fucking
Gems.
seen Uncut Gems. Yeah. Bobby should lose his point.
But basically I was gonna put Uncut Gems, but it's not fair because I haven't seen the movie, so I just
said
Punch
Drunk. How have you
not
seen it?
Because
what's wrong with you?
Because
you watched the 4-hour Justice League movie four times, and you didn't watch Uncut Gems.
Okay, here's the thing. Because my wife, I know, will hate that movie, and I have to find myself time to watch that alone.
Good movies.
No, because it will cause her so much stress because of what that movie is that she will not be able to sleep. So
that's fine.
I showed my parents.
That's fine.
Yeah.
She's just a nurse. No, not
give
really.
up sleep.
Not a nurse.
She just works in a
ultrasound tech.
Not important.
Not
Yeah, I forgot how much swearing was in that movie, and I accidentally showed it to my parents. And my mom's basically review of that movie was there's too much swearing in it. I'm like,
that's a movie that so much of the general public hate, but everyone that loves movies love that movie.
That movie is incredible.
But I know I love it. I want to watch it.
That's one of the greatest movies ever made, for as far as I'm concerned.
So should we move on to comedic directors?
Yes, but I'll give our top
recap
four.
Our list.
Our top four is Adam Sandler as Howard in Uncut Gems. I don't have the other character names written down, so I'm not going to deal with that. Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, Jim Carrey in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and Whoopi Goldberg in The Color Purple. I think that's a solid top four. Sorry, Bill Murray. I don't think you made our list for this or comedic performance, but you are my favorite.
Mentioned a lot. Yeah.
Mentioned a lot.
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
Yep.
Exactly.
He's mentioning quotes,
that's what makes him the
mentioning
best.
Performances. Yeah.
What's next then? Directors?
Directors.
Yeah. And I kick it off.
Who's next? You kick it off, Joe.
So we have comedy directors. I went with my first pick, Mel Brooks. We've talked about him a bit on here. Basically, every single one of his movies is a comedy movie, and it's been a home run. So how can you not have him on your list?
Yep.
Next up, I wanted to kind of represent a newer person in the realm of comedy directing, so I went with Taika Waititi. I feel like he's going to have a long and strong career ahead of him, so I had to go with him. Next up, I kind of went with someone who was a little bit underrated, and I went with Harold Ramis for my comedy directors.
Yeah, he was like my 5.
And, he directed Stripes, Ghostbusters. He had some good television, directing. He directed Analyze This and Analyze That, which were kind of,
he's great.
Underrated comedy films.
Actually, never mind.
He's incredible.
I said he's my 5, and I forgot what I changed. So
And then finally, a person we've talked about quite a bit on this list, I had to go with someone old school, someone who, again, directed a lot of movies, and that's Charlie Chaplin as my director.
Yep.
mm-hmm.
And those are my four.
Joe, we have very
One time
similar
I-
lists outside
yeah.
of one of them.
So I have
Same here.
Mel Brooks, Taika Waititi, Harold Ramis, and Charlie Chaplin as my four.
All right, so I'll stick with the three that I have. Similar to Joe, I have Mel Brooks, Harold Ramis, Charlie Chaplin, and then who I think is probably encapsulates the modern era better than Taika Waititi because his career is not expanded fully. It's Judd Apatow.
Okay,
Judd Apatow. I know he had some that didn't work, but like the 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up is incredible. I love The King of Staten Island. That was one of my favorite movies.
Such a terrible list,
last
Johnny.
year. Trainwreck is great. Judd Apatow also, like, as far as like Tristan mentioned with Amy Poehler and Tina Fey, like he produces a ton of huge things. He easily is. I think that as far as like era expanding, you kind of have, you know, Mel Brooks is like the 70s, but his career expands past that. Harold Ramis is 80s and 90s. Charlie Chaplin is, you know, early Hollywood, and Judd Apatow is, you know, mid 2000s to current. So I think that kind of is era expanding, and I think Judd Apatow just has a career more established than Taika. Even though if we did this in 10 years, I think Taika maybe makes it over him, just based on the movies that I like. From Taika more than Apatow. So, Bobby, it sounds like you have a very similar list to me.
Yeah, honestly, I don't need to go into much detail. I'm just going to list them because three of them are exactly the same, and one you just said. So I have Mel Brooks, Charlie Chaplin, Ivan Reitman, and Judd Apatow. I have Johnny's list. You know, I think that encapsulates, like Johnny said, more eras.
Wait, Reitman or Ramis?
Harold Ramis. I said Reitman. I meant Ramis. Harold Ramis.
So what, you have Mel Brooks, Harold Ramis, Judd Apatow, and
Charlie Chaplin.
And Chaplin. So yeah, we have the same exact list.
No, I just was thinking the wrong name in my head when I said that. But yeah, I think that encapsulates eras as far as comedy goes, and types of comedies as well. And Judd Apatow, as far as a modern director, I went back and forth between like considering even like Edgar Wright. But he's more niche. And like Wes Anderson is like their comedies, but he's got a mix of different stuff. So
yeah, that was one that I considered, but I'm like more dramas. I'm interested to see what Tristan did, but I'll shout out Amy Heckerling did Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Clueless. If she had done Mean Girls, she would have made my list. Like those are like the three greatest teen comedies of their generation. I wish she did Mean Girls. That would have been incredible. The Zucker brothers.
They were on my list, or like they were like my 5 or 6.
The Zucker list are good.
And all that, and Terry Gilliam, who did all the Monty Python movies.
I had him on there for a long time, and I replaced him with Judd Apatow basically because I needed a modern guy on there.
And that's my thing. And Gilliam did more dramatic movies too. Like he did like 12 Monkeys in Brazil.
And then that one
like,
that just came out of like the whatever.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
So Tristan, what do you got for us?
I got a few different ones actually. I got one that crosses over with you guys, and I think it's the easy one. It's Mel Brooks. I feel like that's he embodies that genre so well. How much can you really say about him that we haven't said already? Well, I have another crossover with you guys, Judd Apatow. I think he embodies modern comedy really, really well. I think Apatow movies are a style of their own, and you can tell when something's an imitation of an Apatow movie or when it's trying to get that Apatow kind of tone. So I think he sets that, and like we said before, he produces lots of stuff too. He's not just a director; he's really involved in like the genre as a whole. I went for two more classic directors, and my classic, rather than Charlie Chaplin, I went with Buster Keaton. I think in terms of direction, he really like advanced the craft of filmmaking in a way that Charlie Chaplin didn't necessarily. I think Charlie Chaplin's a great performance and a great like writer, but I think Buster Keaton as a director is really, really interesting. He uses a frame really well. He uses camera movement really well. He just moved the craft forward in a way that people weren't necessarily doing at the time at all. Like people were just, you put the camera there, you record people walking out of like a train station or whatever. You put the camera one place, they're walking somewhere else, and he figured out like, okay, we can move the camera and have that be an effect. We can move stuff behind the camera and like mimic a camera movement effect. And he really kind of pioneered the craft. So I think That's why I went with him rather than Charlie Chaplin. And my last is Billy Wilder.
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
think
Yeah.
really critically acclaimed.
that was really up there. Yeah.
He's kind of the bridge between Ramis and Chaplin / Keaton.
Yep.
Yeah, I picked him for me because I wanted to go for like that critical darling kind of comedy director. I think a lot of times we think of comedies as like Judd Apatow movies today.
Maybe go Woody Allen.
They're like, oh, raunchy. Maybe another world.
Yeah.
And a more
Yeah,
Western
Wilder
world.
are good.
Yeah.
Look, he's got 21 Oscar nominations. What other comedy director can say that? And when you go on the AFI top 100 list, like 5 of the top 20 are him. Like he's had huge critically acclaimed movies. I think in terms of iconic stuff, like The Apartment, like Some Like It Hot. He has some really big movies, and he's done non-comedy stuff. So I consider cutting him because he's done like Double Indemnity and that kind of stuff.
And even like Sunset Boulevard, I think is more of like a drama.
It's not
There's
even
some comedic elements, obviously, but like you get some of the performances that give you comedic. But the only reason I didn't go Billy Wilder is because even The Apartment, I think like has more drama than comedy. Like he's a very good dramatic and comedic director.
It's the reason I took like Terry Gilliam off the list.
And Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went with him just because I think we tend to get comedy stuck in a kind of a bubble, like they're like that raunchy kind of thing for like not for like the critics, and I think Billy Wilder proved that wrong. And we see a lot of like blending comedy and drama together, like you guys mentioned and stuff today. And I think none of that would have really happened if he didn't pull off Some Like It Hot so well, movies like that at the time. So I think, especially he worked under code, he worked against like the Red Scare in the United States. He was very much like in that era of Hollywood. So I think that's an era that I think I'd like to capture in my list.
I think if you go body of work, Billy Wilder probably has more iconic comedies than even like a Harold Ramis. But I think if you look at like in terms of encapsulating the 80s and 90s, you have Caddyshack, you have Groundhog Day, you have National Lampoon's Vacation, you have Analyze This. He didn't direct Ghostbusters, but
yeah, that's true.
But like, you have kind of an Eric spanning, like he kind of encapsulates like that middle ground area. I think Harold Ramis is a good choice. And he only directed comedies. I think if I'm going comedy directors, like, Chaplin, Apatow, Ramis, and Brooks, like they all only directed comedies for the most part. And yes, Harold Ramis ended his career directing Year One. That might be a knock against him, but like.
But then he knew it was his time, and he's like, "I'm out. Have a nice day."
Yeah, he's like, "All right, well, I'm out of here."
Clearly, that
I tried that once.
Yeah.
So, and I think Bobby and I had the same 4. I think those are pretty much locks. I'd go Apatow because
I'm fine with Apatow. I was debating between Apatow and Taika for my kind of modern director, and I was just like, I just like Taika's work better, but I'm fine with
too.
Apatow. I agree.
I like Taika's work better.
I understand why he's on your list.
Yeah.
But I will say this: as much as I love Taika, nothing Taika has done is as funny as 40-Year-Old Virgin. 40-Year-Old Virgin is one of the funniest movies ever made.
It's so good. And
it's incredible.
And I almost put Kelly Clarkson as my quote, but it didn't. In context, it doesn't really like out of the context. It doesn't really work. So
I think you forget how many Judd Apatow movies have actually made like big impacts. You go on his IMDb, and I was looking through, and I'm like, wow, he really did do a lot of stuff that was big.
Every time I'm on a dance floor, I do the knocked up joke of the rolling the dice thing. Like
of course,
yeah.
Like, I do that and the bicycle
right.
from It's Always Sunny.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great.
But no, like Judd Apatow has so many iconic comedies for sure.
Yeah. So I think I'll just say this. Because we'll get to our comedy movies, and we might need 20 minutes to get to our 2 hours to do that. I think our top 4 should be Mel Brooks, Harold Ramis, Charlie Chaplin, and Judd Apatow.
I mean, those 3 of my 4, and I understand why Apatow over Taika, so I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, the only one I wish could be on there is Billy Wilder, because I think he embodies like that. Nothing that's really embodied.
It's basically between him and Ramis.
If there were 5 people on Mount Rushmore, I would say it's Billy Wilder, but the problem is, like...
My thing is this, like, if I went with peak compared to, like, whole career, sure, because he did, like, 3 great comedies, but then the rest are all pretty much dramas. Like, Stanley Kubrick did the greatest comedy ever created for me with Doctor Strangelove, but none of his other movies are comedies. Like it's tough to include directors that do dramas and comedies. Like Bobby mentioned, like if I counted Wes Anderson, I'd pick him over Judd Apatow, but I don't because his movies, like The Royal, I can't say the best comedic director also made a movie like The Royal Tenenbaums, which is very funny, but also someone slits his wrists over a sink in that movie, which is super dramatic. Like, there's plenty of dramatic moments in Billy Wilder's career. If we went even just top 4 directors of all time, I think he has a chance to make that. But comedic directors specifically, I think Harold Ramis has more of a, he is known as a comedy director. I think that is what the tiebreaker there is.
Yeah.
Right.
So that would be where I go.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah,
and I think we're gonna need a lot of time on the next 4, which I think I'm starting off with our comedy movies.
Yep.
Let me.
You want to run those down just really quick?
So real quick, we have Mel Brooks, Harold Ramis, Charlie Chaplin, and Judd Apatow.
Yep.
I think that's a good encapsulation. And then we go comedy movies. And I'm extremely interested to see how much
I'm curious,
commonality
Johnny,
have
if we
here.
cross over on this, but one of them I know, based on what you've said, is not going to be on mine. That it's going to be on yours.
Mine is pretty straightforward, I think. The greatest satire of all time, Doctor Strangelove. The greatest joke, the greatest movie that is joke per joke per joke per joke is Airplane. The greatest parody of all time is Young Frankenstein. And the greatest British comedy / kind of sketch comedy movie of all time is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So my 4 are Doctor Strangelove, Airplane, Young Frankenstein, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Those are my 4. I think they're, not only do I personally think those are maybe 4 of the top 5 greatest comedies of all time, excluding Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I think all of those represent a different genre of comedy and are the best of the subgenres. So those are my 4. So I'm interested to see what Bobby has next.
All right, I have 2 of yours. So I think the greatest parody type of movie of all time is Airplane, and like you said, joke for joke, like scene to scene. Best sketch comedy movie, British comedy, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I've mentioned that multiple times on this list. And here's where I differ. A movie that I've mentioned multiple times that I love and I know Johnny loves, but just didn't quite put it as a comedy for his is Ghostbusters, because I do think nerd culture, comedy, like it has dry humor, it has outrageous humor, it has as far as a franchise, it's a well-known iconic piece of film basically, and that's what I get from that one to me. And then from the 2000s, one that was very iconic and in a coming to age high school to college era movie that I think encapsulates modern comedy very well is Superbad. That to me, my generation at least, we loved that movie. That was like one of the biggest comedies ever to be made for us. And I think it holds up. I think has some, like, McLovin is one of the best characters. It has heart. It has amazing comedy. It launched a lot of careers. And I just think that movie inspired a lot of comedies in the 2000s to 2010s, which is where I'm kind of getting at with that movie. So my 4 are Airplane, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Ghostbusters, and Superbad.
All in my honorable mentions, the 2 that I didn't have, obviously, in my honorable mentions. Tristan, what do you have for us? You're not speaking.
You're muted.
You're muted.
That would help. Yeah. All right.
That's in my top 4. Tristan saying that would help.
Yeah.
I got 2 that were mentioned already. One that you mentioned, Johnny, is Doctor Strangelove. I think it's an incredible parody. It's a hilarious, you already mentioned like a dramatic director that just does this comedy and it's all of a sudden hilarious. It's almost like, oh, dramatic actor does like a comedic actor does a dramatic performance and you're like, oh wow, they actually have that drama underneath them. And then you see like, oh, a serious director does a comedy and you're like, oh wow, they have that like really intense humor beneath them. And I think the parody, the commentary, all that kind of stuff really ages super well.
It's the best satire movie ever made. It's the greatest. I love
And
it.
you think something that was satirizing like a very specific moment in time would age poorly, but I feel like a lot of the themes it's had about like international relations and intentions and that kind of stuff, and like the toxic masculinity of politics and
him explaining we're gonna make a bunker that has all the hottest women and us, and all of them being like changing their thought processes and being like, you know what, the Nazi doctor has a point. Like everything in that movie is so relevant to today that stands up.
And I think it's gotten even more relevant over the last like 2 years when you realize like, oh, the people we have in charge, people we trust to handle like the situations, are just don't necessarily know what they're doing. And I think that this movie has that element of it. Like the people we trust to protect us in the moment we need the most are just like completely buffoons. You don't know what they're doing at all.
And they're everything is for them.
It's all about them. Yeah, it's all what they want in their perfect post-apocalyptic world or whatever it's going to be. Their precious bodily fluids. That's what you got to protect.
Hell yeah.
I have another one that's been mentioned before by Bobby this time, and I think it embodies the early 2000s. It embodies like the teen coming of age comedies. I think every movie put after Superbad that's tried to be like the raunchy kid stuff, like even up to Booksmart, like last year it was compared to Superbad because Superbad like set that standard for what these high school teen comedies could be, especially in the early 2000s, like when people were really starting to push barriers and be R-rated and not be afraid to show kids like swearing and having sex and drinking and doing drugs. And that was the kind of stuff you didn't necessarily see on comedies like a couple of decades ago when they were in code and they couldn't do any of that stuff. And I think that really shows the potential of what you can do when you take away like the censors and you don't say, okay, that's PG-13. It has to have all these rules. And you just say, okay, you guys go do what you're going to do. And then they came out with a huge banger that launched like tons and tons of careers. Whether it was actors or directors or writers, everybody in that kind of went on to be pretty well known. My next is one that we mentioned.
Nacho Libre.
You know, it got close. You know,
Sherlock and Holmes.
I almost put
Holmes.
School of Rock in there. So.
I almost put "Vote for Pedro" as a quote because that feels like it was a very iconic
That
quote.
was
But
good.
yeah, my next one is not Napoleon Dynamite. It's "Some Like It Hot," the Billy Wilder movie with Marilyn Monroe in it. I think that movie is huge. You go on the AFI Top 100, it's the #1 movie of all time according to AFI, and a lot of critics and a lot of like historians praise that as like the turning point comedy, especially for Billy Wilder's career. And I think for representation of LGBTQ kind of discussions, it was something that was never talked about at all because it was at a time when it was kind of under code, and the code was like this thing that you had to go through in Hollywood to be able to get movies out at a certain time when Hollywood was very afraid of like corrupting the youth and that kind of stuff.
Joseph McCarthy ruined
strict.
the name Joseph for everybody.
Yep. I never named my kid Joseph after the two worst people I know.
Yeah. Oh, you know Joseph McCarthy?
I know him well enough, all right?
You hate Joe Biden?
Oh, God. Spreading some lies about me on this podcast. So my Some Like It Hot, that's my third one. I think it was critically acclaimed. It's really loved. It's kind of a critical darling. And my last one, the funniest movie in the last like 25 years. I think we haven't had a lot of like holiday movie representation on this list. So I think having a Christmas movie on my Mount Rushmore was
Die
a fun
Hard.
pick. And my pick is
comedy.
Elf. Elf is hilarious. It's one of the funniest movies I've seen in my whole life. I think
Elf is
that
great.
performance from Will Ferrell as Buddy the Elf is arguably worthy of being on the Mount Rushmore performances. I think that's a great quotable movie that I watch every single year around Christmas, maybe more than once in a season. You know, I think it's a great movie that really embodies family fun comedy and holiday comedy, and I love it a lot. So Elf is my fourth pick.
But have you ever had spaghetti with maple syrup?
I love that.
Gross.
All right.
Joe.
All right, so to start off, I have some that are the same. There were 4 things I wanted to represent. The first one I wanted to represent was spoof films, and for that, I went with Airplane. I think it's kind of the greatest, like, spoof kind of film, spoofing the film 0 Hour. But even if you've never seen 0 Hour, which I still haven't and I really want to, Airplane 100% holds up. There was some study that was, like, to find the movie with the most jokes per minute, and Airplane, like, won by a large amount. Airplane, I think, has to be on the list. I also wanted to do an action comedy, and I feel like I couldn't not pick Ghostbusters. And so I kind of So Ghostbusters is kind of what I went with to pick that action comedy. I do think, to a certain extent, we talked about this when we did our comic book movies. I think on a certain level, like the MCU and even a lot of superhero movies wouldn't exist without Ghostbusters, because it kind of was that nerd culture thing that Bobby was talking about. And then also people keep talking about Superbad as this launching point of like this kind of teen.
Yeah, American Pie.
I wasn't even gonna go American Pie. My pick was Dazed and Confused for the kind of stoner teen hangout movie. Was my pick. And then finally, I can't believe no one has wanted to represent the rom-com, which I feel like is a very, very large part of the comedy genre. And so for that, I went with kind of the consensus number one rom-com is When Harry Met Sally. So my 4 picks are When Harry Met Sally, Dazed and Confused, Ghostbusters, and Airplane.
All right, so this will be an interesting debate. But I'll give a couple fights here. One, you don't have Superbad without American Pie. You don't have American Pie without Dazed and Confused. And you don't have Dazed and Confused without Fast Times at Ridgemont High. If you're going teen comedy, the greatest of all time and the most influential is Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That was my pick originally because teen comedy is such a iconic genre. But I think that other genres past that, like subsets of comedy, that I don't have that. But if we're going teen comedy and it's not Fast Times, then I don't know what the fuck we're even talking about.
But what I would say, Superbad, as far as, yes, it's a great teen comedy.
But Superbad doesn't exist without American Pie.
No, but that's the thing. It's not really whether it would exist without these things. It's that Superbad itself defined a generation of comedies to me that were trying to replicate the style and the writing. And it also launched so many careers out of all those guys, like Bill Hader as the cop with Seth Rogen and Seth Rogen writing that. Like there were
Hill and Michael Cera.
Jonah Hill, Michael Cera. And it's not just like it did the teen comedy in a way, and Emma Stone, that would launch literally a generation of filmmakers that wanted to replicate that style of comedy. It didn't always work, but even The Hangover and stuff like that, movies like that were in the same writing style as Superbad. And that because when that came out, like I hadn't seen a comedy written that way with the types of jokes and the pacing of that movie and the different characters between like on their own journeys, where you had McLovin, you had the cops, you had the 2 leads, you had the Emma Stones, and that. Like I think that movie, I mean, someone who grew up with that as like, oh wow, what happened here? This is different. Like it felt different when that movie came out, personally, like growing up with it.
Yeah, I think it's like
I don't think so, because I think Knocked Up did it the same.
Knocked Up is great. It is great. No,
and if you look at like teen comedy,
it's not.
It didn't connect the same way. It is a great movie that didn't connect the same way to a generation.
I get it because of this. Because when you look at Good Boys and you look at Booksmart, it's like, okay, this is Superbad, but with these type of characters. You know, Good Boys is Superbad, but with elementary schoolers, and Booksmart is Superbad, but with women. And it's like, I get it, but I don't think that's the most iconic. If you're going for teen comedy, high school comedy, I don't think Superbad.
No, what I'm going for is the blend of 2000s to 2010s. It's not necessarily the teen comedy. It is the generation.
But I would also argue that that is the weakest era of comedy, and that is why I stuck with comedies from older eras, because I think every comedy after 2000 is not as good.
And
as
that's
the
definitely that's more opinionated.
90s,
sure.
80s, 70s, 60s. It's more opinionated, but I think that stands up in terms of what people think of comedies.
But I think that you could argue that in favor of Superbad. Because I think Superbad is like the one that beats that standard. It's like all these really bad teen comedies, but then there's Superbad that showed like you can do it well, you can make it funny. Yeah. And I think you mentioned stuff.
I push really hard for Superbad personally. Like that,
I don't.
Superbad is not like that. Superbad takes that idea of that stoner comedy, but blends it with like the teen comedies of the 2000s. It blends it with like that late 90s kind of.
But it's not a stoner comedy. It's just a teen high school comedy.
So and I think that's not even in the top 5 of that. Superbad has to be on the list. I feel like that changed
I
the
don't
entire
think
game of
so.
the genre.
It changed so much. Like,
What
just
did that change? Judd Apatow changed more than that movie did, and he didn't direct Superbad.
he didn't direct it, but he was involved with that movie. Like,
yeah, but okay. So moving past that, we'll get back to it.
we'll come back to Superbad, but I'm gonna fight hard for that one.
My argument against Ghostbusters is I love Ghostbusters to death, but that movie's not that funny. It has a few jokes that work well, but if you watch that, it's nothing like Airplane. It's nothing like Monty Python. It's nothing like Doctor Strangelove.
It's an action comedy.
It's a sci-fi movie with comedic actors, and those actors make some of the comedic moments work. But if you watch that movie, there's like 5 moments that make you laugh in 2 hours. It's not a comedy in my book because I think it's more of
There's
a
way
sci-fi.
more than 5 in that
No,
movie.
there's not. There's, he got slimed. There's Dickless. There's a few things in this drama.
There's Bill Murray's entire interrogation of the woman in the opening. There's him playing the piano very nonchalantly as he walks in the room and stuff, like performance-wise.
There's a little.
There's a lot of it.
I think the humor in Ghostbusters is too subtle to make it as far as comedy movies. I think if you're going for pure comedic movies, Dumb and Dumber is more iconic and way funnier. Fast Times is way funnier. Groundhog Day is funnier. Superbad is funnier. American Pie is funnier. Ace Ventura is funnier. Beverly Hills Cop is funnier. Trading Places is funnier. Anchorman is funnier. Clerks is funnier. Friday is funnier. Those are all my honorable mentions. Those are all funnier movies than Ghostbusters.
But
even
those
though I would
to
say
be-
Ghostbusters is a better movie than a lot of those, as far as comedy movies, Ghostbusters is not in the genre of comedy that I would go for.
So to me, it depends on
comedy
in
movies.
Mount Rushmore what you're trying to represent. Because what I'm trying to do, like Joe did, is the action comedy, the buddy comedy, whatever you want to call it. And because Ghostbusters is buddy comedy, but with 4 of them essentially, that's an entire genre that we're missing. So
I don't think
something
that is
where-
a genre that we need. That's my thing. I think
the
most
two biggest
important-
subgenres of comedies are the action comedy and the
Rom-com and
rom-com.
Yeah.
No, I disagree. I think the 2 most important subgenres of comedy are parody and satire.
Those are
Those
types
are the
of
2.
straight up comedies more than I would say of a combination
Exactly.
of genres.
And
But
we have
those
one
are
to represent
comedies.
those. We have Doctor
We have
Airplane-
Doctor Strangelove and Airplane.
And those would
Doctor
represent
Strangelove
both
and
of those.
Airplane.
I think those. So even though I didn't have Doctor Strangelove, I think that Airplane and Doctor Strangelove are a lock.
But how are you going to tell me that either Superbad or whatever else we were talking about, Ghostbusters, is a better comedy movie than either Monty Python and the Holy Grail
Because Monty Python is
or
the same
Young
genre.
Frankenstein?
Because
This isn't a competition of better movies, though. This is the Mount Rushmore. It's like important
Yeah.
movies. It's movies that
Right.
change the game.
I feel like
of the
Like
genre.
so I would fight out of my list because I had both Monty Python, I had Ghostbusters, I had all those. Like, if we're gonna include
What do you think
Doctor-
is the funniest movie out of those?
The
It's easily Monty Python.
So, but it depends on what we're representing. I think the
Funny
funnier,
movies.
the funny, if we're going with the funniest movie, it is Monty Python over Ghostbusters. But I think Ghostbusters
100%.
represents a different genre that we have. But Ghostbusters out of the, like, that is probably the lowest of the comedies. I would put Superbad as far as a genre representing film above that. And also
So
Monty
Bobby,
Python
if you were going the next 2, you'd go Monty Python
and Superbad. Those are my,
I
so
I think
yeah.
if
I
we're gonna
think
have
both of those are ahead of Ghostbusters.
yeah, and I do too.
And I love Ghostbusters, but I think if you're going Bill Murray movies, Caddyshack's funnier, Groundhog Day's funnier, What About Bob is his funniest movie. Ghostbusters is maybe
It's a-
his
it's
best
a
movie,
genre.
but it's
It's a
not his
genre.
funniest movie.
Right.
But if you're going even action comedy, I don't think of Ghostbusters as an action movie. It's a sci-fi movie with some comedy because of the actors in it.
I
And it's
think
a
if you're
great
gonna go
movie.
action comedy,
But
you
it's
go
not
like
an action
Deadpool or
comedy. You
something
go
like that.
Rush Hour.
Yeah.
Like you don't go Ghostbusters as it's not an action.
Yeah, I'd be
movie.
okay leaving off Ghostbusters, but I'd fight hard for Superbad and I'd fight hard for Monty Python as the other 2.
I think Monty Python is the perfect encapsulation of I think British comedy is a very important subgenre.
See, if we
You
want,
have
I would be
people-
okay including Monty Python under the idea of let's
and it's the
include
most
British
iconic.
comedy.
You're
But I
going
feel like,
iconic. That's the
but also
most
to me,
iconic
something like
comedy.
Young Frankenstein, like what does Young Frankenstein have to offer as far as like a genre or an idea that Monty Python,
I'm leaving that off.
that Airplane, and all the others
because
don't have-
here's my thing. I think there's a difference between spoof and parody, and I think spoof movies have their day. There's a couple good ones. There's Airplane, there's Naked Gun, there's Hot Shots, and you could maybe say the first Scary Movie.
Yeah.
No, you
But
and
as-
what's
as
the
far-
Val Kilmer? What's the Val Kilmer?
Top Secret.
Top Secret.
Batman Forever.
Top secret. But like, if you're gonna go for and I'd say those are spoofs. But if you're gonna go parody, that's not straight up joke for a joke, make fun of everything in the genre. Mel Brooks was not our greatest director. His best movie is Young Frankenstein, and that is a perfect parody of monster movies. I think the only option is between Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles, and I think between those two, it's Young Frankenstein because I think that movie is just funnier and it holds up better. But I can't imagine not having either of those because I think that's.
But then what about Doctor Strangelove? Doctor Strangelove is just a parody of.
Doctor Strangelove is
Right.
a lot. Doctor
So, I
Strangelove
think
is a
it's not-
satire, not a parody.
But the thing is, Doctor Strangelove and Young Frankenstein to me are
They're nothing like each other. They're
They
not
represent a
similar
very
in any way.
similar.
I
No,
think
they
we
don't.
don't need. I think if I was doing this for right now off our list, I would go with Airplane. I would go with Doctor Strangelove. I would go with Superbad, and I would go with When Harry Met Sally. I agree with Joe. I think
Yeah.
we need to have a rom-com representation on the
feel
list.
like when
But
you have
rom-coms,
parody,
I don't know
spoof,
if that's
and
the strongest form of comedy movie. That's
It doesn't matter if you like it, though. It's a
And
matter
I would,
about what's
and
iconic.
Tristan, I would be perfectly okay with that list. Like,
Yeah,
I
see, 'cause to
think
me, when
that
you
is a
have-
good
You're gonna go,
mix.
but Bobby's saying Monty Python is not
Look,
on his list. Then
Monty Python is amazing, but if
it's
you're gonna
a better
but-
comedy than When Harry
Right.
Met
I think-
Sally.
Look,
I
When
think
Harry Met
Airplane-
Sally and Monty Python is my only argument of that four that Tristan just said. But if you're gonna represent what is one of the biggest like comedy genres is rom-coms, I think that is probably definitively the best one as far as like iconography, which we need on a Mount Rushmore, and also influential. So I'd be okay with that. But I love
my
Monty
argument.
Python, so I'd be okay with
My
Monty
argument
Python.
against it is this: I think it's a difference arguing satire, parody, spoof. Those are genres of comedy. Rom-com is not a genre of comedy. That's just its own thing. Action comedy is its own thing. That's just two melding genres.
And
If
I
you're
had
going
Monty
comedy
Python.
movies, you have to pick pure comedies that are a different subgenre of comedy, not an entirely different genre. Rom-com is not the same as comedy. Action comedy is not the same as comedy. Drama comedy, like dramatic comedy, is not the same as comedy. We have to go comedy movies because that's what the category is, and we have to pick satire or spoof or something that is in the subcategory of it. I do not think rom-com counts. That's the only reason I don't have any rom-coms in my honorable mentions, because that's an entirely different genre to me. It's not a comedy movie. It's a rom-com movie. That's different. It's two things melded.
Right, which is why I had Monty Python over it. I'm just saying, if we did go with those four, that is a concession I'm willing to make. But I would fight hard for Monty Python over When Harry Met Sally because
It's a
of
funnier
the comedy.
movie. Dumb
It's-
and Dumber is funnier
right.
too. I don't think you can go with a movie that is not as funny if you're going with comedy.
I feel like you're getting confused about this list. Like, this isn't lists of our personal most funniest movies. Like, this is the ones that we think represent the
But
entire
it's
subgenre.
it's comedy movie.
But then why did we allow?
I think
to
you
me,
guys
that-
are too much expanding. I think you guys are expanding as far as comedic performance or comedic quotes. Yes, you can expand to those other things because comedy is in the genre. But a rom-com is totally different than a comedy. Those are totally different movies. Those aren't the same to me.
See, that's right. I just
You guys
disagree.
agree with
But I
that?
think an action comedy is still a comedy. A rom-com is still a comedy.
See, the thing is with me, I agree with that. but I can't leave off Monty Python over When
Yeah.
Harry Met Sally in general. Like as far as like my list is concerned, like Monty Python
agree.
is such a funnier movie and does represent a genre that right now, if we are, because I mean, I think Tristan tried to sneak it in. I would also too of getting Superbad on the list because I love that as far as a generational
I just don't think
movie.
that's the most iconic teen comedy.
Yeah.
Maybe
Makes you
to us
crazy
now.
if you don't think it
But
is.
but generally,
Maybe with
yeah.
us our age. But I'll say this: there was a tweet going around the other day that was, depending on your age, this is the most iconic. Like, when you think of party movie, that is the genre I would say Superbad is in. Not teen comedy. I would say that's a party movie. And if you think of party movie, whether you are an older millennial, middle millennial, or a Gen Z, if you're an older millennial, you think of American Pie. If you're a middle millennial, you think of Superbad, and if you're a Gen Z, you think of what is it, Party X or whatever the fuck that
Project
movie
X.
is.
Project X.
I think they're gonna think more.
And those
Booksmart.
are based on your.
But the thing is, I love like American Pie. I grew up with more than Superbad, but Superbad changed the game personally as far as film way more than American Pie did. American Pie was hilarious and like I thought it was funny, but it faded very quickly. Like that's a
Not
movie that
really,
didn't hold
though.
up, and Superbad holds up. Like personally, the comedy when you rewatch it, American Pie has a couple
Not
funny
all of it.
moments.
I gotta say,
No, like there's
you watch
like
Superbad.
obviously
There's some things that
no,
don't, but,
like
you know,
there
that-
are obviously, but
that era.
that's more of a that's like a what's considered problematic now.
It has a lot of the
issues, but-
you know how I
Yeah.
know you're gay from not.
Yeah, no, for sure.
For
Yeah.
virgin moments.
It does, but we didn't hold that against 40-Year-Old Virgin either when we were talking about that movie earlier. I mean,
But that was a
didn't
quote.
make the
That
list,
wasn't
but-
full movie. 40-Year-Old Virgin is far and away a funnier movie than Superbad. Superbad is a movie that we grew up with. It was funny when I was in 8th grade when I saw it. But if I watch it now, it's fine. It's no Fast Times. It's no Dazed and Confused. It's no. It's
And to
not
me,
even as
and
good
to
as
me, it
movies that
does-
were past it. Booksmart is better. Good Boys is better. It's not as good as the movies that came after it, and it's not as good as the movies that came before it. So it's hard for me to be like, yes, Superbad deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore.
But to me, that's different. Like all that you said, like Superbad does hold up more than the other movies that you listed to me. Like even Booksmart, which I thought was really good, I can't help but compare it to Superbad and think that the
Right.
characters in Superbad are more iconic.
I feel like
And I
no
think
one's opinion is gonna change, honestly. So I feel like we should just go around the horn. Everyone name 2 movies. If there's 3 or 4 movies that's on everybody's list, we go that, and then at least we're down to at least one option.
Well, okay.
I
so
wanna say this.
We
Okay,
have,
we have 2
Airplane and
Yeah, we have
Airplane and
Airplane-
Doctor Strangelove are
locked in.
locks.
So I
Those
feel
are
like
good.
that's what I'm saying.
Is Monty Python a lock? I say yes.
I don't think so. I think
I
we
don't
have
think
that
so either.
covered in Airplane.
all right.
Bobby says yes.
I say Superbad and Monty Python. Those are my 2.
Those are your
Bobby
2?
says Monty Python. Tristan says no.
Tristan, what
I
are your
s-
2? If you were
My
to
2 are
fill out
Superbad and When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah, those are my 2. Or my 2 would be, because I feel like Ghostbusters is kind of forgotten at this point. So my 2 would also be Superbad and When Harry Met Sally.
So Superbad's at 3.
Superbad. Okay, so at this point, I will defer to you guys. I think Superbad is a lock, even though Fast Times is way better.
So now it's When Harry Met Sally or Monty Python.
Or Monty Python.
I really
And
like
I
Monty
think
Python a lot.
Monty
but I think-
Python is a better comedy movie.
And I agree. It's
but
so
it's not about
quotable.
better
It's
movies,
Yeah, I'm
though.
with
It's
Tristan.
about-
It's not about what's better.
It
It's
is
about-
and
represents-
more iconic.
it represents okay. So here's the difference. If we're coming down to what Johnny was
There's
talking
one
about, is-
line in When Harry Met Sally that's famous, and Monty Python you can pull 18
All right.
quotes.
Johnny,
I'm
1
okay-
second. Just really quick, let me get this out. If we're talking about straight up comedies that Johnny was talking about, so we have rom-com, which is kind of a combination of genres. What we have on our list so far are more straight up comedies.
Mhm.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail is a sketch comedy. It is a lot of sketches that make up a entire story, and that's what that represents as far and also British.
Yeah, that's what
comedy.
I was gonna say. I don't exactly hate Monty Python getting on solely for the fact that British comedy is a big aspect of comedy, and we don't have anything representing British comedy.
Yeah,
Yes.
British comedy, sketch comedy, whatever you want to call it. It's
That
both
might
of
be a
those.
good move.
And I the reason I agree with that is because yeah, When Harry Met Sally is a super iconic movie, but we're not doing the top 4 rom-coms, and I do think that is a separate genre than comedy movies. If we're going strictly comedy, I think you have to go subgenres of actual comedy, not a blend of two different genres. Monty Python, like Bobby said, is a sketch comedy. And how many failed sketch comedy movies are there? A million. Monty Python works.
Yeah.
My personal favorite is Life of Brian, but I knew that wouldn't make it. Actually, sorry, Meaning of Life is my favorite.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought that was yours, but yeah.
Meaning of Life, and then that. So I think you have to go Monty Python. If you think comedy, like nothing is more iconic than Monty Python. As much as the one line in When Harry Met Sally is famous, and that made our Mount Rushmore of quotes. How many actual jokes do you think of from that movie? No, it's the story of two people falling in love, breaking up, and then getting back together. That is a rom-com. And you have one iconic line that is famous, but nothing else in that movie is that iconic. You have one scene. Monty Python has a million scenes. You have the...
We are the Knights Who Say Me.
Yeah, the Knights Who Say Me. You have...
We are now the Knights Who Say Nicky, Dicky,
You have what I think is one of the greatest comedic scenes of all time of them figuring out how a witch is a witch. Of her actually being a witch at the end is so funny.
So great.
And then you have the ending of them get arrested because that did it better than Blazing Saddles. We don't have an ending, so we're just gonna end it this way. I think Monty Python is the perfect encapsulation of a
she turned me into a newt. A newt. It got better.
It got better.
Yeah, like there's
that,
so many.
Everything in that movie is so much more iconic than When Harry Met Sally.
You won me over.
There we go. But you guys won on Superbad, which I'll give you.
Hey,
all I really want was Superbad, so I feel good.
Yeah, Tristan and I were fighting hard for Superbad.
You guys fought for it, and
you won me over.
I think you won. I think Fast Times is the choice if you go with teen comedy. But if you go era specific, and we don't have, I think the weakest era of comedy is anything after the year 2000. So I think that, like, I would go as far as if we were to say comedy movies after the year 2000, I think 22 Jump Street is the best comedy sequel ever made and a way better comedy than Superbad.
Yeah.
But we didn't even bring that into the fight. But like Superbad to me is not even in like the top 5 of like movies after the 2000s as far as comedies go.
Yeah, and it is for me. And
you
I
guys
consider
said
the
it's
Jump
a party
Street
movie, and it's a party movie. It's what our generation maybe considers a great comedy. So whatever, like I get it, but I don't know. I don't know if that one holds up as well as you guys think it does.
For me, it was less about holding up and being entertaining in the moment as much as it was about like that movie. I remember it coming out. I remember it's like shaping the entire way I watch comedies. I remember
completely, yeah.
Everything afterwards trying to capture that Superbad energy. Like even The Hangover tried to be like Superbad, but it didn't really get it. And Hangover came and went. And
very underrated. Very underrated teen comedy of that era was Accepted, which came
out Accepted.
Great.
Which I think Accepted is a big reason Superbad even exists.
Somebody did.
And I think Superbad.
Ask me about my wiener.
I think the only reason, like for me, like the biggest fight I have against Superbad is I think it's influenced by so many other movies that it's hard to say that makes it. But I will say this: Booksmart was great. Good Boys was great. I think both of those are better than Superbad, but every single review of those movies this is the Superbad of this. Yeah. This is the Superbad of this. So I do think Superbad holds the test of time only for that reason of any party movie that comes out in the next few years is going to be compared to it. Yeah. And
yeah, that's
no one's saying Good Boys is the Fast Times of Ridgemont High of this. Like, people are saying this is the Superbad of it, which, is the argument, I think. So I get it. I disagree with it, but I understand it.
All right. So
are there any comedies that you guys wanted to mention real quick that didn't get up on the episode?
They all were good.
I kind of mentioned mine, but Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop, Ace Ventura. Like if we were going action comedy, Beverly Hills Cop
Yeah.
is the best of the bunch.
Beverly Hills Cop
Ace
was my
Ventura
number
is
2
great.
for action comedy. I was debating
Yeah.
for a while.
I had Beverly Hills Cop, I had Ace Ventura, and I had Dumb and Dumber as like considerations.
Dumb and Dumber was my number 5, just because it's so funny. That movie, if you want to talk about like Monty Python with iconic lines and joke per joke with Airplane, Dumb and Dumber is amazing.
I also had for a long time in either performance or movie, I had The Mask.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that too.
So that was really close.
I will say this though. A movie that came out in the same era that is way more iconic than Superbad is Anchorman.
Yeah.
The entire internet, social media when it first came out was basically just people quoting Anchorman.
Anchorman was very close.
Is 10,000 times more iconic than Superbad, but it's a different genre.
Yeah, I have Anchorman
comedy, but Anchorman, I think Anchorman is a much stronger candidate for a Mount Rushmore. You put Ron Burgundy's face on there, it's more iconic than anything from Superbad.
Yeah, I had Anchorman as a runner-up on like almost every category.
Same.
Like
yeah,
I was so close to getting Will Ferrell.
Yeah, I'm kind of a big deal. Like I had Anchorman.
60% of the time, it works every time.
Yeah, Milk was a bad choice.
Go fuck yourself, San Diego.
Everything. I think Anchorman is a better choice.
I'm in a glass case of emotion.
As far as if you go independent comedies, which we didn't really represent, Clerks is a great choice. And then if you went funniest movies ever, like Dumb and Dumber, I think makes it. Dumb and Dumber is so funny.
I think we made good arguments for what we had on the list, but there are so many comedies.
But also
It's a tough argument. There's a million comedies, and we're picking 4.
Shout out to Elf. I had that in my top 4, but we never talked about it at all. But
Elf is good. Elf is funny.
But it's not even Will Ferrell's best comedy.
Yeah. I would have Anchorman. If we were going to do a Will Ferrell movie, it's got to be.
It'd be Anchorman, or personally, Ricky Bobby is my favorite.
Oh, I love Step Brothers.
Talladega Nights is incredible. If you're not first, you're last was almost in my comedic quotes because that line, everyone uses that line too.
Help me, baby Jesus.
But I will say the best part of Superbad is McLovin and me have the same birthday. So, what are you going to do? All right, let's go around the horn in reverse order. Tristan, what are your final thoughts?
It was a fun episode today. I was nervous at first. We were taking forever, but I think we eventually started moving a little bit quicker. But I had a good time. Comedy.
That's an opinion.
Comedy is a genre that I don't necessarily have a ton of experience with, so it was fun to dive into it and look up some stuff that I hadn't seen. And I'm excited to watch some of the stuff that mentioned this week and I haven't seen. So I'm just had a good time. Looking forward to whatever we do next. I'll talk to you guys then.
All right, cool. Bobby, final thoughts.
Comedy is so subjective, and it comes down to personal taste a lot of the time. And I feel like just first thought is what I went with for a lot of this, and it was a lot of fun to do and compare it. And I like to see that it did still match up with a lot of people. But you could argue for days on these.
Yep.
Yeah, but this was a lot of fun. I think we came up with a good consensus, and even if not everyone agrees, I think enough people agree to make it work and have it work as a Mount Rushmore. So I think we had a good episode and had a lot of fun.
All right, cool. Johnny, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Our consensus on that last category, because I never read those, was Airplane, Doctor Strangelove, Superbad, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I do think that's a strong 4. I will say this. I would throw all of those movies in the trash for a little sketch show on Netflix called I Think You Should Leave, which is the funniest show / movie / anything ever created. I Think You Should Leave is the greatest thing ever put on TV.
Better than The Whitest Kids You Know? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no one gives a fuck about that. No one gives a shit about the Canadian one, about New Kids on the Block or whatever the fuck that's called.
Not that.
Kids in the Hall.
Kids in the Hall. I Think You Should Leave. If you have not seen that, watch that. It's incredible. That's the thing I've watched the most over quarantine. I watch it every couple days.
To Rhode Island. Oh wait, sorry.
No, just the greatest thing ever made. So if we're going for comedic taste and you really want to get a sense of my comedic taste, it's that and like super dark comedies, which is another category I don't think was represented on this list.
Oh, well.
Whole different genre.
Yep, different genre.
Like
no one cares.
Like Parasite. is
Alright.
more of a drama, but I think a lot of great comedy. So I go with that. Watch I Think You Should Leave. That's my final comments.
All right, my final comments are I've had to pee for the last like 30 minutes so fucking bad.
Same.
So if you want a good bit of comedy, just rewatch the last 30 minutes of me just dying over here as Johnny keeps bringing up new fucking shit that I don't care about.